And welcome to the April 9th meeting of the Ithaca Common Council and Committee of the Whole. We will go ahead and get this meeting started. Seeing that we have some folks in the gallery this evening, I will read the emergency evacuation notice. In case of an emergency, we are to take one of two exits, the door that most folks came through, or the one right back here, and head east towards the corner of South Cayuga and Green. Please do not cross the street. Those with restricted mobility, in the event of emergencies, it is best to move to one of the stairwells and first responders will arrive to aid you. In the event of other emergencies, you'll be notified at that time. We want everyone to be aware of their surroundings and offer help when it is not to your own detriment, as you are your own best advocate. Any additions, changes, or deletions to the agenda? I'll note that Alderperson St. Perez is joining remotely under the qualifying conditions of the teleconferencing or local law passed a couple years ago. And we have excused absences from Alderpersons Matos and Shapiro. And with this, is there a single member of the public in the gallery who wishes to sign up for the public hearing who has not? Because once I open the public hearing, sign-ups will be closed. Seeing none. All right. Moving to review of our minutes. Can I have someone please move the review of the February 12th and March 12th minutes? Moved by Alderperson Keel, seconded by Alderperson Haynes Sharp. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor? And that carries. Alderperson St. Perez, that carries 8-0. Alderperson St. Perez, you are legally required to be on video if you are in attendance. You might have to promote him to panelist.
Thank you. I'm not seeing a turn on video option currently. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Helen, can we promote him to panelist? I think he needs to be a panelist to join the video. There we go. Thank you, Alderperson. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to open a public hearing. Move Alderperson Haynes Sharp. I have a second. Seconded by Alderperson Kumar. All those in favor of opening the public hearing? That carries 8-0. All right, I have a number of individuals signed up. We have a sufficiently small number that we will have 3 minutes per speaker. And the first is Wendy Wallet. Welcome. Please just make sure that the microphone is illuminated green, and you have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hi, everyone. I live at 209 Valley Road in Ithaca, and I want to begin by stating that I'm all for ADUs. A sensible law making it easier to build ADUs would increase the number of rental units in the city, while enabling families to house aging parents or earn additional income. However, ADUs would also increase the desirability of single-family homes to corporate interests, whose only concern is maximizing profits. The addition of ADUs makes homes more appealing to investors, as they then have rental income from 2 units instead of 1. A sensible law would have to discourage real estate investors from buying single-family homes in Ithaca. The proposed ordinance before you, by allowing the development of ADUs without conditions, will turn our community into a playground for investors seeking to maximize profits. This has already begun in Ithaca, and it's happening in communities around the country. Large corporations buy single-family homes, outbidding families by paying with cash. They buy not just a single property, but many, and then they bundle them and sell them to out-of-town investment companies. Managers for these companies increase rents and often fail to maintain the properties. They have no connection to the community and no long-term interest in the community. Even small local investors are turning what was once family neighborhoods into landlord-tenant zones. And I'm not opposing rentals or landlords. I am speaking in support of allowing family-owned homes as well. Witness South Hill, family-owned homes are fewer and fewer, and rentals predominate. Ithaca needs more rentals, but you also need to protect home ownership and neighborhood quality. It's required in the comprehensive plan, and it's required by logic and decency. Over 70% of Ithaca's housing market is rentals. As city leaders, you have a responsibility to promote a balance of housing types, including both rental and family-owned homes. If you pass the ordinance before you, you'll put another nail in the coffin of home ownership and neighborhood stability in Ithaca. The new short-term rental law can serve as a model for sensible.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Wendy. That is your time.
Just about done.
So if you can submit the rest of your comments in writing, I have to adjudicate just, neutrally here. So you may submit the rest of your comments in writing. Thank you so much.
I ask you to use
Thank
the
you. That
same
is your time.
language for ADU
Required to
development
just
as for
enforce this
short-term
uniformly.
rentals.
You'll have to forgive me.
Add language.
Thank you
to
very
this
much. That is your
ordinance
time.
that states
That is your time. Thank you very
must
much.
be a natural person
That is your time.
to add an ADU to your property. Thank you.
I'm going to request that all speakers, if they wish to continue with their comments, do adhere to the time limit. This is something we have to enforce impartially. Thank you. Rupert Spees, your next speaker. Before you begin, I've just been notified that there's an issue with the YouTube stream, so just bear with us for one moment before you
Okay,
begin.
sure. This is on?
Yes, but just hold
Okay.
off on your comments.
Hi.
Since we're recording and we have members of the public, I'm going to continue the meeting. We will get the live stream up as soon as possible. We're up. Thank you, Sam. All
We're
right.
good?
Thank you, Rupert.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. You
Yep.
have no more than 3 minutes once you begin.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Rupert Spies. I also live on 209 Valley Road or in 209 Valley Road. And I too want to express my support for ADUs. ADUs offer one avenue for the city to increase housing stock. The city's proposed legislation does away with any restrictions as to who occupies the main dwelling when an ADU exists. This is an incentive for outside and local investors to buy homes that have existing ADUs as it increases their return on investment significantly. It has been argued that an owner occupancy requirement would reduce the chances of homeowners to obtain mortgages for homes containing ADUs if there were such a prerequisite. After talking with some local real estate and banking professionals, AFCU, CFCU, Howard Hanna, I have learned that banks prefer conventional owner occupancy mortgages. An owner occupancy requirement would not be a hindrance to obtaining a mortgage. Margaret Hobby stated, and I quote, "I have been selling houses locally for almost 30 years and have never, ever encountered a situation where an owner occupancy requirement held up financing for a buyer. Have the mayor and planners consulted with local lenders? I am urging council to keep a requirement of owner occupancy for ADUs on the books, so that the current and new homeowners have a fair shot to build an ADU and aren't pushed out of the market by big corporate interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My next speaker is Teresa Alt. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
I'm Teresa Alt of 206 Eddy Street in College Town. In terms of zoning, I live in R3. The proposed change to the zoning code facilitating addition of accessory dwelling units to existing housing is good to go. My only complaint is that near the bottom of the first page of the ordinance, the word accessory is misspelled, or at least was on the day when I read it.
Thank you. My next speaker is Sarah Curlis. To keep an ongoing bit alive, the real one. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hello. As our mayor said, my name is Sarah Curlis. That's actually me. I live at 606 Madison Street, which is in Ward 1. And I've lived in the city off and on for over 10 years. I also do direct service work in this community and have for the last several years, and specifically with low-income community members, some of whom are currently homeless and at least half of whom are people of color. And I'm also an organizer with the Ithaca Tenants Union, and I am here to say that we have a desperate need for more housing in this city. And so I am constantly trying to find affordable rental housing for people in the city. It just doesn't exist, or it takes forever to get people into. And if you're unhoused, you need it now. So I'd also like to say that over 70% of Ithaca residents are renters, and they deserve more options also, because we are a extremely low supply, high demand market here. And with more supply, that would help tenants and be less of a landlord-focused market. I support this bill. I like that there's no parking requirement also, fun fact. And I trust the City of Ithaca Planning Department. They do good work. Shout out to the short-term rental policy they wrote. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. My next speaker is Tom Clavel. Welcome, Tom. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hi, I'm Tom Clavel. I'm a lifetime resident of Ithaca. I live in Fall Creek, a few blocks from the house where I was born. I have watched my neighborhood change over the years. Very nice, very wealthy people moving in and moving out. Some other very nice people who are moving further away. We can't afford it. This is a really good start. We need to build a lot more supply, and with the ADU, I like the idea of improving affordability for homeowners who don't have a lot of money and improving affordability for renters who don't have a lot of choice at this point. I'm not particularly concerned about big out-of-town landlords coming in. I think that's code for renters, and I don't mind it. If we're running into high costs, we just need to build our way out of it. Thanks.
Thank you. My next speaker is Taylor Moon. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I live on 87 Uptown Road in the town of Ithaca. I'm here because I want to encourage you to move forward the legislation as it currently exists. I think the previous speaker actually spoke to a lot of my sentiments. Well, I guess I want to generally express that I think that we desperately need more housing stock in this city. It is extremely unaffordable. And one of the primary ways that we can combat that is by building more units. This is probably only going to create like tens of units rather than the hundreds or possibly thousands that we would need. But this type of zoning reform could make a meaningful difference overall. in conjunction with other similar measures. And I think that regarding the concern about corporate landlords buying up properties, I'm definitely sensitive to the fact that corporate investors do have a lot more money and can outcompete families, and that generally they're not the best landlords. They do tend to neglect their properties and everything. But I think it's also important to put that in context of the larger rental market, and that it is desirable to create more rental units, potentially by having both of the primary dwelling and the accessory rented out. And that restricting the sale away from certain entities would kind of be reflective of a general change in the approach that we were taking to the market as a whole. I think that this is going to be a relatively small fraction of the market compared to the rest of the rentals in the city, and targeting specifically ADUs not being able to be sold to large corporate investors is going to make a very small difference overall and would be inconsistent with the policies we would have elsewhere. And that is my time.
Thank you. My next speaker is Joel Friedel.
Okay.
You can leave that with the, yep, thank you.
I pass it out now.
Patrick, would you mind? Thank you. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Good evening. Oh, with the baklava, that's great. Good evening. My name is Joel Friedel. I live at 208 Lake Avenue in the north side of Ithaca. The ADU proposal you will consider tonight is one of the most substantial land use changes since residential zoning began in Ithaca. Council needs to consider major economic and environmental issues that could be unintended consequences of this proposal. First, Ithaca is highly unusual in that 3/4 of the city's housing is controlled by developers and landlords. This proposal provides a huge incentives for developers and landlords to acquire even more residential properties because most of those properties will now come with a building site for ADUs. Ithaca has already gone through a real estate bubble in College Town and a boom in housing units in the last decade. In this time, Ithaca has seen major rises in real estate prices, major rises in tax assessments, and consequently major rises in rents and housing costs. Would this new ADU proposal make housing expenses in Ithaca worse? The past years provide solid evidence that a real estate bubble in Ithaca is not good for tenants or homeowners. What actual evidence is there that handing more housing to landlords would be better? There would be more supply, yes, but landlords and developers and their banks will need their money. New housing does not come cheap, and commercial ADUs will not supply a single new unit of affordable housing, only more market rate housing. Second, Ithaca is also unusual in its geography. 3 major hills, 4 major waterways, and a lake make Ithaca vulnerable to flooding, as we have all been hearing lately. An important defense and recovery asset is our green infrastructure. Green space and mature trees to soak up that water. How would potentially hundreds of new buildings taking over Ithaca's remaining backyards affect our ability to cope with flooding? New buildings and parking create large impermeable footprints. They also require impeding or nearby trees to be cut down. The ADU project on my block on the north side prompted the cutting down of over a dozen mature trees, hardwood trees on land that is definitely in the flood zone. What evidence can planning staff or anyone else provide that this ADU proposal would not make environmental impacts worse? In the last few days, reports indicate that the Trump administration has killed Ithaca's flood mitigation project, making this looming danger even more stark. I fully support owner-occupied ADUs, in part because it is now so hard to own your own home in this city. I fully support more housing in Ithaca that makes sense for the needs of the city's tenants, housing costs for all residents, and environmental safety. I hope the council can evaluate this proposal seriously based on evidence, not on hopeful assumptions. Ithaca's tenants and homeowners.
Thank you. I'm
the
sorry.
city's
That is your
character,
time.
and
You may
its
submit the rest
fundamentals
of your
land
comments in
use have
writing.
Much to stake in this.
Thank you very much. Pat Sewell, you're
I
next.
wanted to finish it then.
Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hello, I was here at the Common Council meeting, so I won't repeat what I was saying earlier, but I'll sort of reiterate. I think the overwhelming majority of people here are going to support ADUs. I think we saw that in the surveys that were handed out. Most people in the city support ADUs. I support ADUs, and most people in my ward support ADUs. What we're concerned about is owner occupancy, and specifically for Ward 3. And the reason why Ward 3 is because Ward 3 is in Bell Sherman and it's in South Hill, and we have student pressure that comes from there. And so we've seen consistently outside developers buy up single-family homes and turn those into rentals. And we have a large amount of rentals. If you look at the rental vacancy, it's pretty high relative to the single-family home ownership vacancy. And there's a big imbalance in there. So I am not requesting that we have blanket owner occupancy requirements, but what I would recommend, and I think also our representatives have suggested, is that we carve out the third ward. That leaves you 4 other wards to do ADUs, to expand housing, which is not going to be immediate. It'll be over the next, I don't know, 5 years. This is not a short-term answer to this thing. But if we keep owner occupancy requirements for the third ward, it gives us a safeguard to try to save some of the single-family homes that are left, because that is really, really a shrinking number of living style. Like, there's just not a lot of single-family homes being built anywhere. So my request to you all is to look into the idea. We already have a overlay, thank you. An overlay on South Hill that could function as a perfectly good model for what a owner occupancy zoning requirement might look like for South Hill. Put one of those in Bell Sherman, Ward 3, the rest of the 4 wards, ADUs, no owner occupancy, that's fine. There's no reason, I don't see a good reason why we couldn't do a carve out. So please think about that. I think both of our representatives would support that.
Thank you. Andre Gardner, you're next. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
My name is Andre Gardner. I'm a local landlord and a member of the Ithaca Board of Zoning Appeals. Unrelated, well, I guess related. My wife and I actually lived in an ADU on West Court Street. It was built by a private landlord sometime based on the Sanborn maps when West Court Street was called Mill Street. So a piece of housing that wouldn't exist with owner occupancy requirements. So I'm here tonight to speak in favor of the proposed ADU legislation and in opposition to owner occupancy requirements. I think, no one's mentioned this so far, but we've been talking about this since 2019. We've had numerous public comment sessions and hundreds of staff hours. We have 4 members of the planning department back there right now spending their evening talking about this again. I think we've beaten public comment pretty hard on this one, and I think everyone's had a right to speak, and I think we owe it to people to put this for a vote and close this out. I think the central issue at this point in time is whether or not we should use a form of exclusionary zoning to protect the character of certain neighborhoods. And people point to the South Hill district as a win there. So when the South Hill overlay was passed, there was 1 member of council who voted against that. That's Duxon right there. And it's been pointed to as a big win, but the reality is the opposite. We've taken all of these small scale rental properties that are roughly 150 years old at this point in time and kind of frozen them in place. We've taken all these backyard parking lots that got 8 or 10 cars in them. If you look on Google Maps, there's dozens of them, and we've frozen them as beer pong and parking lots. And instead, we could have had carriage houses or multiple primaries back there. And, it has not dealt with the affordability challenge at all. We haven't seen landlords say, oh my God, I gotta get out of this business. I'm gonna bring them back to single family homes and sell them off to individuals. They've just kept them as is and they're rotting. That's, most Ithaca housing that's that old is essentially totaled. Housing prices in Bell Sherman and South Hill routinely sell in the $400,000 to $500,000 price range. These aren't low income neighborhoods that we're protecting. These are higher income neighborhoods. I don't want to get too dramatic here, but exclusionary zoning is based on kind of a darker history in our housing time. And I'm very skeptical of people saying we should use zoning to regulate who lives where, what a family looks like. I joke as a landlord now, a family is like two people and a cat, or one person with a cat. Like, it's this changing thing. Then we try to regulate it, it does really adverse things. Bell Sherman still has single family homes with 20,000 square foot lots. If that 20,000 square foot lot was in anywhere else, there could be 7 duplexes on that property. So the idea of saying, oh my God, these corporate landlords are going to come in and build.
I'm sorry,
one
that is your
ADU.
time.
Thank you.
You may submit the rest of your comments in writing. Next, I have Brent Katzman. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Hi, Brent Kotzman. I'm an associate real estate broker. I also represent government affairs at the Ithaca Board of Realtors. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed accessory dwelling unit ordinance being considered by council this evening. It's no surprise, I'm certain, to many of you that here in Ithaca and Tompkins County, we continue to experience a severe shortage of affordable single-family dwellings, be they for rent or purchase. Sales of homes that are affordable to residents earning between 60 and 120% of area median income have fallen 62% since 2020, according to an analysis done by the Ithaca Board of Realtors. Further, in this past month's Tompkins County Economic Summit, it was noted that 58% of households here are cost burdened, driven largely by the cost of housing, while vacancy rates remain below 3%. For many property owners, property taxes represent nearly half of their monthly payment. I am fortunate in that I own a home with an accessory dwelling unit. I rely on it to cover my growing property taxes and to contribute to the escalating costs of maintenance and utilities. But it's also clear that this proposed legislation alone won't solve the concerns for adequate housing supply. After all, the cost of site-built new construction in our market is estimated to be in excess of $400 per square foot, suggesting that many of the property owners who might be eligible to build an ADU should this legislation pass simply won't be in a position financially to pull the trigger. By my math, 800 square feet at $400 a square foot represents a $320,000 investment. I do acknowledge and appreciate the funds pledged in the 2025 budget for the development of pre-approved building plans for ADUs to help facilitate the creation of these units. But much more action is needed. Therefore, I also encourage council and the planning department to approach the current zoning reform study that's supported by the $250,000 regional economic grant that the city received with a broad view towards creative solutions for enhancing and encouraging the creation of additional owner-occupied housing in the city. This may take the form of allowing for lower-cost building methods by right, such as tiny homes or other forms of off-site constructed residences, earmarking certain public lands for housing development, or introducing policies that can reduce the carrying and pre-development costs for market-rate housing creators. Again, I do hope the council moves forward and approves this proposed ordinance, as I do believe that, over time, several units will be created as a result of this legislation, contributing housing stock and permitting property owners to generate much-needed revenue to help support their housing budget. I thank you for your efforts in these important matters.
Thank you. Next speaker I have is David Barkin. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Okay, good evening. I'm here to ask that you vote this out of committee and then proceed to vote in favor of this policy as it's written by staff at your next meeting. The reason I support this ADU legislation as it's written, absent the owner occupancy requirement, is because I have experience as a realtor, as a contractor, and as a landlord. So I've actually built these for clients. I've also built multiple primary structures for myself. Those are very different from what's being discussed here tonight. The ADUs on the docket are basically an adaptive source of housing, right? So to basically say, well, sure, it might cost the homeowner $250,000 to put that in. That should be their proclivity, their ability to navigate that. And what you're trying to do is lessen those barriers to entry. And that's a good thing, right? So if you look at our market as a whole, what we're trying to do is add consumer choice and quality of life relative to high costs, right? And the biggest thing driving costs, as I see it in this market and in this community, is actually our high cost of living, and some of that is just a byproduct of our tax rate, of our municipal budgets, right? Our school budget, but also our city budget. So you need to add supply and you need to add taxable structures. And you need to renovate existing housing stock to do all of that. And in the end there, if homeowners have an adaptive resource that they can tap into or try, that should be their right. And it's this body's goal then to make that happen. I do also want to touch on the exclusionary aspect of an owner occupancy requirement. Sort of saying, well, let's hold off on Bell Sherman or let's hold off on these other neighborhoods. So much of our issues today are rooted in those decisions and policies from 50 years ago. You know, we have zoning on the books from the 80s, and this is an adaptive rethinking of that in line with what your astute and battle-hardened urban planners on staff have advised, right? And they've studied this and they've put forward this legislation as such. So I do think that we need to walk back any sort of slow rolling of this. We've had plenty of time as a community. I think you have all the information that you need to vote this out of committee and then vote in favor of it at the next meeting. And then we'll see what the market can bear, right? And sort of, we talk about, well, what are some of the potential consequences? Well, what's the consequence of having waited on all of this is that now with tariffs, right, anybody that goes to do this has to pay more, right? So inaction is oftentimes worse than
Thank you.
than going forward.
That is your time. Thank you very much. Next, I have Teresa, forgive me if I mispronounce your last name, Lisko.
That was a good job.
Thank you. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Yep. Teresa Lisko, Ithaca Road. I'm in favor of ADUs for many of the reasons that were previously stated. However, the ADU legislation should not be passed unless it is amended to require an owner occupancy of the main unit. And without that requirement, the Bryant Park, Bell Sherman neighborhood, 3rd Ward, becomes more valuable when the addition of it allows the rental of 2 separate units and making it potentially available for absentee landlords. And as previously stated by some of my neighbors, we've experienced a lot of that. The neighborhood then becomes too expensive for local residents to purchase houses. So not including an owner occupancy requirement does not add additional housing to the city overall. It only encourages ownership by absentee landlords. Thank you.
Thank you. My last in-person speaker this evening is David West. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Thank you, Council. My name is David West. I live on Center Street. I'm a homeowner in the city of Ithaca. I also happen to be an urban planner with many years of experience. And I want to start by giving a shout out to staff. This is very good legislation and people have worked hard on it for many years, and I'm really happy to see it here. I want to thank council for having the bravery to move forward with this. And in particular, I want anyone who's concerned to do a quick Google search of the word poison pill and ADU. And what you'll see is that this ordinance doesn't have things that are poison pills for ADUs. There's a lot of municipalities that have adopted ADU regulations, and they say, oh, I want ADUs, and they don't get any. And it's because they do things like owner occupancy requirements, high parking requirements, high open space requirements. This ordinance will get us some ADUs. It's a small part of the solution to housing. It's not going to get us a lot of housing. It's not going to create a lot of change. You know, I think I'd give everyone a high five if we had 10 in a year. So it's not going to make a big change one way or another, but it is an important piece of the strategy. We need an all hands on deck approach. And I hope that you will adopt it as is and move forward. I do want to give a final suggestion. If people care deeply about owner occupancy, I suggest after you adopt it, you come back and remove the limitation on selling ADUs. Why not? We could have more owner occupied homes.
Thank you. My next speaker is Sally Lockwood online. Sally, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome. You have 3 minutes once you begin.
Okay, thank you for offering this Zoom option. First time. I am in support of the ADU unit, but with owner occupancy. I live on South Hill. We have South Hill Elementary School in the middle of the street, in the middle of Hudson Street, smack dab in the middle of Hudson Street. It is a perfect neighborhood for families. And I suggest that by requiring owner occupied, it will encourage families to compete with each other to purchase housing. I believe there would be people in that room right today and listening who are not homeowners, who want to be homeowners and find themselves competing with landlords and developers who often, when they see something on the market, will offer above asking price and sometimes in cash. They are not interested in living in this neighborhood. They do not want to send their kids to school. They want to make money. Fine. So this is where I'm very passionate about the owner occupy thing, so that people who want to become homeowners and raise families can compete, can do that. And in a sense, right now, with 70% of the stock already owned by landlords and developers, sales are restricting. We are restricting people who want to become homeowners but cannot compete. So it's basically saying, oh, let's redline, but without saying we're redlining. We know if I were to buy a home today in Ithaca, I could not compete. I couldn't even afford a broom closet, let alone a whole house. This house that I live in right here is I bought in 1999. It was a buyer's market at that point, and things have changed a lot. But anyway, there were more families at the time. There are a lot fewer families owning homes in Ithaca at the moment, and it requires a better balance than to have 70% of the stock already owned by big, wealthy people and entities we need a better balance of that so that families can compete. And that's my say.
Thank you. That concludes our list of speakers. May I have a motion to close the public hearing? Moved by Alderperson Kumar, seconded by Alderperson Nguyen. All those in favor of closing the public hearing? Alderperson St. Perez, are you present?
Yes, I am. My video has been disabled by the host.
Well, that motion carries 8-0, and we'll get you back on video before we resume. There we go. All right, next order of business is considering the proposed accessory dwelling unit legislation. May I have someone summarize and move? Kind of looking at Alderperson Nguyen, because I imagine that he's wanted this to move forward for a while.
Oops. Well, so this ordinance would legalize the construction of accessory dwelling units by right and is currently written without an owner occupancy requirement. So move as written.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alderperson Letterman. I will now open debate to council, and I also recognize that we have members of our planning office here, so I'll invite them to the table to address any questions from council members. Alderperson Keel, you're recognized.
I said this is the last time we discussed ADUs, and I'll just restate it today as we have more members of the public. I have spent, excuse me, I've spent time over on South Hill with some of you in this room. I'm talking about ADUs, and I've also spent time talking with developers in Ithaca about ADUs, and really can see the worry on both sides, especially representing the area of the city where everyone's worried about the pressure coming from. That being said, one of the most enlightening things for me when discussing this was, well, first of all, I think one of the big talking points when we discuss ADUs is about how this is going to provide more housing stock and therefore drive down the price of housing. The problem with that is that pretty much the lowest cost you can get an ADU to pencil in the city of Ithaca is $2,500 a month, just to cover your costs. It doesn't really feel like that's going to do anything for affordable housing for me. I encourage people to build ADUs if they feel like it would be a good investment on their property. I also don't think that, and this is something that multiple developers who have developed projects in the college town area have talked to me about, that there are, if they want to invest in a property, they are not investing in a property to build an ADU. They're investing in a property where they can build a multiple unit dwelling, so that they can actually house people and actually make income. That's not something that they can do with an ADU, and it's much more difficult to rent out an apartment that's $3,000 a month to a college student. So I'll be supporting this tonight. I do hear the concern, and I do think that there are things that we can do as a council and as a city to decrease rental pressure on single family areas of the city or family oriented areas of the city. That being said, I don't think that the ADU issue is something that is really going to impact things one way or another.
Thank you, Alderperson. I'll recognize myself briefly to just say I had an opportunity to speak with a few members in the gallery, a few members of the public in the gallery before the meeting started. But I do just want to note that I think there is a really strong proposal in Governor Hochul's budget this year that might address. I share the alderperson's perspective on investment properties, but I would also say that the governor has a proposal that would prohibit private equity firms from purchasing or bidding on homes on the market for the first 90 days that they are listed. And want to just say, for those members of the public who are concerned, you should be very proud of your council, which unanimously supported that in a letter to the legislature, because I think that is a concern that we have seen around the country, and it's something that needs to be dealt with at the state and the federal level. But that fear of that non-person entity competing is something that we are all, I think, in agreement on. We want to see ameliorated. Further debate on this. Alderperson Letterman.
Sure. First of all, thank you to everyone for staying engaged. My understanding is this, legislation, I think, was drafted for the first time in some form back in 2019, excuse me. 6 years, wow. No, I think I understand that ADUs are not a silver bullet to our housing crisis. I also am glad that we're focusing on building more housing and finding ways of doing more infill, which I think is really important. A couple of points I heard tonight that I sort of wanted to reemphasize. One is, particularly I know folks had spoken in favor of the sort of an exemption for the South Hill, like the South Hill Overlay District, or for some parts of the Third Ward. And I think what Andre Gardner mentioned, who's on the BZA, is that a lot of those properties right now just get paved over and get turned into parking that's rented at an extremely high price, oftentimes $150 a month or $200 a month. Parking now in College Town goes for more than $300 a month. Obviously, that's further away from Cornell's campus. But for Ward 5, that alderperson Fabrizio and I represent, if we were to grant an exclusion there, certainly we would see it's not fair to other people in Cornell Heights or down in the flats, and I don't see it as really being a productive measure that would substantively. I don't think it would substantively address a lot of the concerns that folks have. Although I am receptive to that fact. Also, just in terms of the delay, one thing that had been noted by David Barkin was if we had done this in 2019, I thought, oh my gosh, when interest rates were below 1%, how much more building we could have gotten done. Obviously, we're not looking at that environment now, unfortunately. But no, I don't want to have any more obstacles, and I'd like to see a couple of these get built and move in the right direction. And hopefully, even if some of these are more expensive, and that'll give more housing options for other folks, and we'll have more fluidity and life cycle movement in the housing market. I know we've talked a lot about senior housing here and where other folks can retire. I also know that there are a lot of different constituencies that we don't always hear from that favor ADUs. I think AARP in particular nationally is very supportive of it, and in their policy research, they've come out against, as David West mentioned, the sort of poison pills that we see, and I know I've looked into that, and basically the research to me seems to point to that being a real detriment in terms of even the limited number of ADUs that we would see. So I'm happy to support the legislation in the form that it's in right now.
Alderperson Nguyen and then Brown.
Well, as people have mentioned, we've been at this for a long time. And so I'm supporting the ordinance as written tonight. David West, really, my former constituent before redistricting, made pretty much all the points I was going to make, especially using the term poison pill. He also understated, he is an urban planner, but he's the director of planning in Geneva. So, I've always taken his advice and expertise, given it a lot of value. So I think I had also summarized all the reasons which I think the ordinance as written is good policy. And it's true that the housing that may be created by constructing an ADU will not be the most affordable in Ithaca. But it is nice standalone housing that will make the property more affordable for the homeowner. And the reason why people refer to it as a poison pill is keeping that owner occupancy requirement may make it harder to sell that property when they do have to downsize or change or move. So I just have one question though for staff, which is, I know we've talked about this before, but what are the plans for a catalog of ADU designs to make the process easier and more affordable for the homeowner or the property owner rather?
So we do have funding set aside that we can use to work with design professionals to create a few designs of ADUs. We had to wait on that though to see what the policy would look like. So once council adopts a policy, we can then go ahead and start that process. It will save people, if they choose to go with one of the designs, it will save all the design development costs and preparing construction documents and things like that, which construction right now might be the more expensive part, but certainly any bit that they can save, it could be up to $10,000 or so.
And I'll add through our research, in talking with some Eugene, Oregon planners, we could get one of theirs for free. So I think we could maybe find that in other communities, as well.
And the last time we talked about this, I was interested in actually striking the part that disallows selling of ADUs, but you remind me some of the barriers to that. I think like access easements would be a thing, and then having the property conform to zoning after it's sold or after it's partitioned from the main. Can you just kind of go over some of the barriers that we might have to that?
So right now, we need to make sure that there is access for emergency response too, which is why some of the street frontage requirements in our zoning exist. Also, it is less expensive for a property owner to tie the utilities into the existing primaries utilities so that they don't have to run separate connections, standalone connections from the street, and that would make it difficult to sell in the future, to sell it separately. Anything else?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for everyone who spoke, because I really came here without a set of which way I was going. I really want to hear, and I want to thank David West for clearing things up for me. It helped me to understand much better. And of course, yes, one thing I know, and I know our community needs more housing, and I know ADUs is not the bullet, right? And it's not gonna be efficient. I mean, that won't help us get to where we want to see. And also, I was really thrown off when I heard about comparing it to redlining. That really set me to okay, I'm voting for this legislation, because that is far, far, far from the truth. How could you even compare that, right? Redlining, when let's take a look at that community and see who lives there. But anyway, that's a whole nother pace. But I thank you all for all the work you've done since 2019, and I'll be voting for this.
Alderperson Fabrizio.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I do have a question for the staff. Are there any, I do hear all of the homeowners who have watched over the decades their neighborhoods change in very significant ways. And I do have a lot of concerns for people here, for families here, and others here who are trying to buy homes into neighborhoods and live in the community. And I'm just wondering, are there any mechanisms, like local mechanisms, that communities, like just to reference what you were mentioning, Mayor, about the Hochul legislation, about putting a sort of hold to be able to give like community members, I don't know the phrase, like how we term them, but basically like non-corporate entities, the possibility of, sort of first dibs on housing. Like, are there any local mechanisms that could ever be considered? I mean, this is what is being considered on a state level. So I'm just wondering what we might be able to do here.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, City Attorney. I just assumed that, given that it raises the specter of a question of preemption, I thought perhaps you might be the alderperson's question about whether or not the city can functionally regulate ownership of property.
I think the answer to that is probably that we cannot. But it would depend on a lot of factors, depending on how you would want to do it. But generally speaking, we can't use our zoning authority to regulate ownership, only use, is the short answer.
But the state would be able to do that.
Correct.
Right.
Or just to extend the home rule conversation, or should the state ever decide, similar that they did to Good Cause, that they empowered municipalities to make those determinations themselves? I don't think that they would in this particular case, but that is that a correct understanding of home rule in New York?
Right. Yeah. Home rule authority gives us the power to do certain things that the state lets us do. The state reserves the rest of its power to itself. So there's a lot of things that the state can do that we can't do unless we're so authorized by the state.
Right. So I guess I would also just say, I do support the concept B of ADUs just because I know how incredibly expensive it is for people to live here, and I do see it as a potential way for people to help pay while they're providing housing for other people. I see it as a way for people to be able to bring family members, older family members. I see it into a community. I see it as a way for senior citizens who want to downsize, who have not very many options here. But I also recognize the extreme cost and the rising cost, rapidly rising cost to do these. And I really agree with Patrick in that I think, and other speakers, that this is not going to make a very big dent, because I think it's just going to be wildly expensive to be able to do it. And in terms of the argument of making, more, housing more affordable for Ithaca, I don't think this does that at all. This is like a kind of a way to pat ourselves on the back for doing something to try to create a bit more housing. I don't see this as having a huge impact on the housing market. I do, though, still, I have lingering concerns for people being, just single residents being outcompeted by cash offers by developers, whether they're local or outside developers. And I don't know exactly how we fix that, but I am really sensitive to neighborhood concerns. So thank you for coming out. I guess I also just want to say that I think that, this has been talked about for a very long time, but again, I would just like remind council and staff that there's so much stuff going on in the world, and people don't necessarily like plug in and come and speak out until we're right there and it's right on the cusp of being voted upon. So I would just as a sort of general policy, I would like to see us have some kind of like mandatory time between when something is announced, when there's a hearing, and when it's actually being voted on. Because if we're really going to be a government that wants to get input and wants to engage people, and then a government that wants to actually incorporate that input into what we do, we need more time than what is happening with this framework that we're looking at right now. And I think, if that is something that requires a legislative change, then I would be very in favor of looking into that.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I'll turn this to a vote. All those in favor of moving the item forward to the
Just
council
raised
meeting?
my hand.
I even looked over my shoulder and everything. You waited till I stopped? Go
No,
ahead.
I was
You're
trying to raise, I
recognized.
apologize.
You're recognized.
As will be a surprise to no one on council, I have a lot of concerns. They're concerns that I've expressed in the past. They're concerns that I will continue to have. Look, I represent two communities that are on the borders of our two universities that experience a different form of housing pressure than the rest of the city does, to a different degree. I appreciate that this policy may in fact, and I will concede this, may in fact not be a threat to the continuing of these communities. But I also think that that would see this policy effectively failing at its goal, if its goal is to create large amounts of housing. If it is going to create the mayor has previously referenced thousands of units, which I think is frankly unlikely, right? That would be made by people who have the access and resources to develop units. That is large-scale landlords and small-scale landlords, people who have the structural power and knowledge of how to manage the system, know how to develop properties, etc. Right? Someone earlier mentioned that tenants deserve to have more choices. I absolutely agree. And I think one of the choices that is sadly lowering as time goes on is your choice of landlord, as there are less and less landlords in the market. Look, in the end, I think because of those extra pressures, I have to be incredibly skeptical of how this is going to play out and how it's going to impact the communities I represent. And I think that skepticism on my part and on my community's part is valid, given what has happened in the past and given what things might look like in the future. Now, look, I would like to ask if this is if the intent is to move this directly to the voting meeting next month or to move it to our next meeting.
The item on the agenda is to be referred to the May Common Council meeting.
Understood. I would like to move that we move this to our council planning meeting. That is our agenda planning meeting for next month. I think that is fully appropriate. I think we should put all of our agenda planning within the agenda planning meeting.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Discussion, Alderperson Letterman.
Well, I appreciate the desire for more discussion. I think, as mentioned, this was proposed first in 2020 and almost got to a final vote. And I think we started talking about this process more than a year ago. I think it was last March when this first came up, 2024. So 15 months on, I feel that it is time to vote for one last time.
Alderperson Fabrizio, you're recognized.
Yeah, so just to remind everyone, this was first announced, that this was first on the agenda on Friday. That's like 6 days ago or so, less than 6 days ago. And people didn't get notification about the public hearing. We did receive quite a few email from people, but there are many people who said they wanted to speak. They were not able to come on such short notice, which goes back to my previous point about how I think we are coming up short over and over and over again about notification to people and being inclusive of getting people to come and speak with us and sort of work through the details of this. I do totally agree with Pierre. I think that the issues that have been raised are really valid, and there are, in particular, South Hill and Bell Sherman being the closest to campus. They have particularly intense development pressure on them, and as I said before, people who have been there for decades have watched. You mean they're not making it up. They've watched what's happened to their neighborhoods. They've watched them be bought up. They've watched stuff be plowed down and new stuff being built. They've lost a lot in their neighborhood. So yeah, I would agree. I think that I would like to be able to give people who wanted to speak opportunity to come and do that. And I would like us to think again, if there's any way that we can help protect the neighborhoods who are under the most intense development pressure in the city.
Alderperson Keel.
Thank you, Pierre, for that motion. Would you be amenable? Well, I'll say this first. I'm always in favor of hearing more people speak. I think it's our duty as public representatives to listen to the public, especially if there are concerns. I'm always available for people to reach out to myself. My phone number's online, my email's online. I love sitting down with people. That being said, we have an agenda planning meeting this month if we wanted to do another public hearing in like a week.
Strictly legally speaking, we can't.
Well, and not like an official public hearing, but if we want to notify the public tonight and hold another space for people to comment publicly next week at our council meeting, we could absolutely do that, correct?
Yes.
I think that would be more amicable to me today, and then if we feel like we need to do more public comment after that, we can discuss having another meeting next month after that. But it feels a little silly to hold another public hearing next month when we have a space for the public to come and talk next week. I don't think we necessarily need to drag this out more than it needs to be, especially if there's an opportunity. Would you be amenable to changing your movement to next week instead of next month?
Yes, I would absolutely be amenable to that. That is what I believe that was moving.
Okay, great. Well, then I'm in favor of having a space for people to come and talk to us next week as well.
Just to clarify, what the motion is to refer this legislation to committee
next week,
not to have a designated space to discuss. That would be a separate motion. The motion as moved by Alderperson Nguyen is to move, I'm just procedurally, is to move this to the voting meeting of the Common Council. If the Alderperson so wishes, there might be, once this motion has been disposed with, there can be an opportunity to make a motion to add a public comment section at the next meeting, but that would not be in the strict interpretation of what the Alderperson's motion is.
That makes sense to me procedurally. I'll still vote for this if we're going to do public comment at the next one. I just think it makes sense to keep them paired together, and we can move it to the full agenda from there. I'll be supporting this.
Alderperson Brown.
I don't know if yeah, I do know what I'm like really on my heart right now is about, like, this has been in plan since 2019. And if you have not got out to have a comment and all the discussions in your community, I'm like that's just a little, like, especially from that community who always have a lot to say and a lot to ask. And I'm not saying it in a negative way. I'm saying it in a way that that's a community that I have seen out here on a regular who are who pretty much voice I hear, right? But what I'm more concerned about when we keep talking about these big bad landlords from out of town who's going to swoop in and buy up all this property and do all these different things, it sounds to me like, and I'm going to be pretty honest, it sounds more to me like we're trying to keep our community and keep it the way it is and not eliminate certain people coming in, right? I haven't seen that community change very much in diversity in other ways. So what I'm hearing is I'm feeling like there's a discussion that's not been discussed. And so to continue to keep prolonging this from 2019, now we're in 2025, is a little concerning for me. And I'm someone who always want everyone to come in and use their voice and be involved. But right about now, I'm not, like hearing what I've heard from anyway, what I'm saying is I'm a little concerned why we have to keep this door open like that to make sure when many people are anyway, what I'd like to see us move on, and if we want to move on, thank you.
Recognize myself first and then repeat speakers. Yeah, I'm in agreement with Alderperson Brown. I recognize that there are members of the council who are opposed to this legislation and have been for a significant period of time. I think that I respect the parliamentary validity of delaying, but I don't see any substantive change occurring. Council has been fairly uniform in its support for this legislation in its current form. To the alderperson's point, this has been a long time coming. And to my other colleague's point, had this not been delayed initially, we might have had units built at a much lower cost than we are going to see in the near future. I do also just want to correct the record. The alderperson referred to me saying that we were going to build thousands of units. And as I'm sure he recalls, that was a facetious response to asking how much space could physically accommodate additional units in the city, to which that would be thousands of units. As staff quickly followed up with, there are significant zoning and building requirements that would necessarily limit that. But of course, we are never expecting thousands of accessory dwelling units to be built. Alderperson Keel.
I think that Alderperson St. Perez is before me. He has his hand up, and he has not spoken yet.
He has spoken to this motion, but yes, Alderperson St. Perez and then Alderperson Keel.
If I may, my first point here is simply structural. My understanding was that the special topics meeting was intended as a discussion, and the third meetings of the month were intended as agenda planning meetings.
That's not how we've been operating for the last 18 months.
I hear you. That is how it is billed. And I think moving something to the agenda planning meeting, structurally, it feels better to me. And I think, yeah, I think that is preferable. Look, as to the question of community engagement, and look, if you want to address community engagement, and the community has been engaging this whole time, we've been telling you, the community I represent has been telling the city this whole time that there are concerns and skepticism, reliably. Look, maybe giving this one extra week of discussion, by which, by the way, this is not setting policymaking back. Maybe it won't make a difference, but if it will, if it'll help address any concerns, if it will help allow for a better discussion on the issues, there is, I fail to see the harm, even from the perspective of someone who thinks that I am a crazy person over here.
Alderperson Keel.
Yeah, I just want to point out a couple of things. I'm still in favor of this, but I also think that there's this narrative that's being spread around right now that, well, not spread around, maybe that's a little too strong, but that we've been having ongoing discussions as a council about ADUs since 2019. But as I think timeline up has clearly states, there's a failed attempt in 2019, 2020, and then, unless I'm wrong, no discussion until early 2024. So I think that, you know, again, also, it's not setting policy making back to have an additional opportunity to discuss with the public this legislation, which clearly has significant community response at one more meeting before we vote on it. It's not delaying anything by doing that. So I'm always in favor of more community engagement. I'm going to vote for this amendment.
Yeah, Alderperson Nguyen.
I mean, I don't have a, so, if my colleagues decide to wait till next week, that's fine with me, but, it's easier for me to want to move forward. I've been pretty consistent in my support for the past decade, and I've been reelected with the expectation that I support this legislation without the owner occupancy requirement. You all have your own stories and promises to live up to. So I won't be mad if we wait a week, but I will point out that everyone will still have an opportunity to comment at our main council meeting. And that's the meeting that gets the most attention anyway. That's our regular full common council meeting. Always gets the most press coverage and the most public comment anyway. And so if there are still, thoughts that people feel have not been put out into the public, I would encourage people to come to the first Wednesday in May.
I'm gonna bring us to a vote on this motion. No,
Sorry, I was just going to say one thing in relation to that comment. Can I go ahead?
on the motion.
Well, it's just related to Duxon saying people could come at the beginning of the month.
On the motion, please. You can definitely get there, but just make sure it's germane to the motion.
I think it's demoralizing for people to come to a council meeting, make a comment, and because there isn't any time for things to be incorporated if you're really looking for a substantive change. And I recognize that this council is very, is pretty set in their mind about this. But I'm just saying, it's like if you come and you speak and, you expect something to maybe potentially be incorporated, and it just isn't the same thing as if you come and you speak and it gets voted on immediately. There isn't that opportunity. So I think I don't support that process.
Alderperson.
I just will note, as like a legislative, practical matter, nobody's actually proposed a written alternative or amendment to this. So I don't know. Again, I've heard both sides of the issue for sort of a very long time. My phone number's on the city website, as is my email address, as my cell phone. Anyone can call or text that or send me an email anytime. And as I've read about 18 comments I think we got today. But we don't actually have an alternative we're considering that anybody's suggested in writing, which I've asked for from other folks, but yeah.
I'm going to move this to a vote. The motion from the alderperson is to refer this to the next committee meeting next week. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion fails 4-4. Oh, well, motion fails either way. Alderperson Keel.
I would move that we incorporate a public comment section into next week's agenda.
Is there a second? Second by Alderperson Fabrizio. I'll ask for unanimous consent. No dissent. Alderperson Letterman.
I'm just going to ask for unanimous consent on the resolution. As mentioned, just
we're in the middle of voting on the main motion, so if you could just wait. The main motion, the ADU ordinance. The current motion on the table is to refer this to the Common Council meeting for May. All those in favor of the ordinance as moved? Those opposed? And that carries in favor, Alderperson? Yeah. Okay, so that carries, goodness gracious, 7-2? Thanks. It's musical chairs. Now, Alderperson, you're recognized.
Yes, just want to correct a technical error in part. I missed this at the top of the meeting. the resolution I brought forward, which I was absent last meeting because I was sick, was referred to this meeting for, is not on the agenda, so the city attorney just suggested I ask, if that's correct, tell me.
This
Just,
is a labor liaison.
yeah, ask unanimous consent
Which
to
Alderperson Keel moved
add-
to this meeting, and
Yeah,
somehow it just fell
added
off
to
the
the
agenda.
agenda.
Yeah. Any objection on unanimous consent? Seeing none, it's now added as 3.6.
Wait, Pierre, I think Pierre.
It's in the last.
Alderperson, are you objecting to the labor liaison change?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, shouldn't we have addressed this during additions or deletions to the agenda?
We should have, which is why I snarkily commented to the alderperson that he had excellent timing by letting me know that it was off the agenda moments after we had moved on from that part. But strictly speaking, with unanimous consent, it can be added. So are you objecting?
Yeah, I think it would be better to address this at our next meeting.
Pierre, again.
Hold on. So objection to unanimous consent. This council voted to refer this. This is a clerical error.
Right.
It should be on the agenda.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay. Someone can appeal the decision to the chair, should they so wish, but I'm going to rule that this is on the agenda as item 3.6. Next is 3.3, proposal to repeal and replace local law 186, flood damage prevention. Thank you.
I move that we have a 5-minute recess to let the room clear.
Seconded by Alderperson Fabrizio. All those in favor of a 5-minute recess? Those opposed? That carries 5-4.
I told Victor he needs to eat all of the cookies you brought. Yeah, it's actually just yeah, thank you for clearing that up. Yeah. I'll just explain it.
We are back in session. We are on item 3.3, proposal to repeal and replace local law 186, flood damage prevention. May I have a mover?
If I may.
Yes, Alderperson.
As no discussion has since occurred, I would in fact like to appeal the decision of the chair to add the so-called item 3.6 to the agenda.
Sure. Is there a second? Motion fails. 3.3, proposal to repeal and replace local law 186, flood damage prevention. May I have a mover? Moved by Alderperson Letterman. Please summarize and move.
Excuse me. This local law number 186 just brings us in compliance with various FEMA and state regulations relating to floods. It does not, in fact, mandate that the city flood anything.
Awful. Is there a second? Second by Alderperson Kumar. Before I turn to council for comment, I will recognize the Director of Planning.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to introduce Sam Quinn Jacobs. He's a planner in our department. He's worked hard on this ordinance and as well as the community rating system evaluation. So he'll be presenting that and also filling in anything that I miss here. I do have a few things to say, just to kind of walk you through the local law if you would like. Okay, so this is the legislation that will adopt the new maps, the new FEMA maps. So those set the boundaries for the 100 and 500-year floodplains. And the legislation also, or the law also lays out slightly updated guidelines for floodplain regulations. We're repealing and replacing in full because these regulations were given to us by FEMA through DEC, and they represent the minimum standards for regulating floodways to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP. So we can't really change it, but there are a few little things we can change. I'll talk about that. This local law must be adopted and sent with documentation that's adopted to DEC by May 19th, which is 30 days before the effective date of the maps, which is June 18th. As stated in the memo, failure to adopt the local law results in immediate suspension from the NFIP, which among other things provides federally backed flood insurance to residential property owners in the 100-year floodplain. So as you may know, we've been talking about the update to these maps for many, many years. I think Mike talked to you about the flood mitigation study last week, and I think he gave an overview of the remapping process. Just a little additional information if you didn't mention it. During the rollout of the preliminary maps, FEMA they did a bunch of outreach. They did some press releases. They held 2 open houses, one in the city and one outside the city, because FEMA didn't just remap the city of Ithaca, it remapped all of Tompkins County. So they held 2 open houses, and Mike and I both attended to represent the city with the flood mitigation project, and they were well attended, and they were meant to let property owners come and talk to FEMA, find out if their property was in the floodplain and in the new floodplain, and get information about that. All right, so staff did attend a technical assistance session with DC recently, and we submitted this proposed legislation for review to DC on March 20th, which they said was fine with a few small changes, which we've integrated. So what is in the local law? So mainly it is the bulk of the law lays out the duties of the floodplain administrator as it pertains to issuing floodplain development permits. But in order to do that, they have to say where these permits are required, and that's where we adopt the new map. So in one of the first sections, 186-7, it states the maps that will now be in effect. And it also designates the floodplain administrator. That's no change from our current law. So the bulk of the law, as I said, really talks about how you issue floodplain development permits, what the criteria are. We have always issued floodplain development permits for the properties within the 100-year floodplain. It's required for new construction or substantial improvements. And substantial improvements are defined as an improvement, the value of which is more than 50% of the structure that you're improving. So if you had $1,000 building and you made an improvement that was $501, you would need to get a floodplain development permit. So again, it lays out the criteria for issuing the permits. It gives submission requirements, construction standards for different types of structures. It says how the permit process is carried out. It's very much like a building permit process. It's kind of a phased process where you submit drawings that show that your building is going to be in compliance with the regulations. You get sort of a preliminary permit, and then during construction, the project is inspected to make sure it's complying, and then at the end of the project, it's inspected again, much like a building permit process, to make sure that the building was built in compliance with these regulations. Also sets penalties for noncompliance, records retention, and provisions for variances. So an important thing to remember about this whole thing is that for communities that participate in NFIP, they get like audits every once in a while, periodic audits. And the audit consists of inspecting the records for the floodplain development permits primarily. They come and they look at our records and make sure that we've been following our rules. So because this is a repeal and replace, I thought I would just mention how this differs from our current law. It's largely the same, but there are some differences, including some new definitions, like accessory, they added a definition for accessory structure, crawl space, historic structures, other things like that. I have all of them marked if you're interested. They also expanded a lot of the definitions, which makes it easier to implement and interpret the law when you're trying to administer it. They reorganized it, and they included new standards for particular kinds of construction or structures that weren't included before, such as manufactured homes, recreational vehicles, and accessory structures. And then the one final thing that we could change, DEC offered optional, it was 5 or 6, 5 optional things we could put into the ordinance if we wanted to. We looked at each of those optional provisions and determined that one of them was feasible out of the 6, and that is to add a definition of substantial damage, which is in the proposed law and as for your consideration. This allows, if we add this definition, it allows property owners to apply for certain kinds of funding should they have repetitive damage on their property. So we thought that was very feasible and of benefit to the property owners. Budget implications, just quickly, is that, because the floodplain is much expanded, we're going to have more floodplain development permits. The process is already very much integrated into the building permit process, so we don't anticipate we don't have to develop a whole new process, but it will be a larger volume of work. And so in acknowledgement of that, we did include a $150 permit fee, which we didn't have permit fees before. We included a $150 permit fee for the permit, and we feel that that will cover the cost of the staff time to review it. So we're presenting this for your consideration tonight. We will be returning, or there will be a public hearing at next week's meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions.
First on my list is Alderperson Fabrizio.
Right, so just so I'm totally clear about this, we're adopting maps that we're asking actually for reconsideration of, but we have to adopt this in the meantime so that we can ensure eligibility for the National Insurance Program. Is that right?
So we must adopt these maps to continue to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Right, but these are the same maps that we have asked for a re-review of, right? Or
so,
not?
As Mike mentioned last week, the review that we're asking for will not significantly, or maybe even at all, change the boundary of the maps. They will change some of the assumptions behind the maps. So as he mentioned last week, I'm not the technician, but the way the water flows, how deep it is, it will affect those kinds of things which interact with the model for the flood mitigation. But the change to the maps that we're requesting now don't actually change the boundaries. They just allow us to implement a flood mitigation project.
But he said it would have the number of properties that would be impacted by needing flood insurance.
He said it would have it?
Yeah. He said there were like 1,200 and it would take it down to 600.
I don't believe that's what he said. I think there are 1,200. I just, okay. I don't believe it changes the boundary of the flood maps.
So why are we doing the re-review of this again then? Sorry. I mean, I know this is not, it's a little tangential to this, but
So if I could just, because it is tangential, if I could just clarify, and I apologize if I'm just restating in a different way, but our issues are not with the boundaries of the maps. It is with the technical assumptions about water flow, permeability, and lake level. And so, which is why it was so difficult for our team to identify the discrepancy between the USGS maps and the FEMA maps, because from an aerial view, the satellite overview looks to be the same boundary. It's the extent of prospective flooding damage that we're taking, we have contention with.
That's right. And can it be mitigated? So,
Right.
That's different than the boundary of the maps.
Okay, no, I thank
But
you
the-
for that
the flood
clarification.
Mitigation project, if we're able to do it and do this request for a map
Lumber.
amendment, will pull if we can implement the whole thing, it will pull the boundaries back to where they are right now, more or less.
I'm sure that he said it would significantly reduce the number of properties. So what I really hope we can do as soon as possible is get something official out there, because if people need to get this insurance in place really soon, and they haven't been notified, and I have continuing concern about that. I made a request for that to happen last week. I made a request again for that to happen this week. The city has still not put an official notice out there. And if people are supposed to have flood insurance in place by June 18th, I think we're really asking a lot.
Well, for anybody that's listening, flood.gov, it's flood.gov. Yeah. Floodsmart.gov is a great resource for flood insurance. We have on our website lots of resources for flood insurance, as does the county. I just wanted to let people know that, since you're saying it, we will do a press release.
I'm just going to quickly jump in. We do have the CRS as the next item here. I do want to make sure that our comments on this are narrowly scoped to the repeal and replacement of the local law under consideration. Alderperson Keel, you recognized? Oh, I'm sorry. Alderperson Letterman's correct. I did recognize him next.
Just a quick question. What were the other 5 options that for some reason we couldn't do, or if you don't have them off the top of your head, that's fine.
I actually got them right here.
Oh, thanks.
I can summarize them as best I can, but there are 5 of them. So the one that Lisa spoke to is called repetitive damage. So that expands the definition for substantial damage to include damages that happen over a 10-year time span. So that was the one. Another one was called compensatory storage, which requires any development within the floodway to add fill or excavation in a neighboring property so that all water drains to the water course. And we found, as the city's mostly built out, that was not feasible. Scrolling through here. Okay, yeah, well, but they're mostly related to development and regulating types of development.
For instance, one was no critical facilities can be located within the flood. So obviously we can't do that because if we did that, we wouldn't be able to substantially improve any of our critical facilities. So for instance, and among
that was exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And medical facilities and fire and police. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Sam.
Sure thing. Yep.
Alderperson Keel.
I actually would love if you could speak to the last 2. I'm just really interested. Thank you.
I'm happy to go through them. All right. So another one is cumulative substantial improvement. So it's similar to substantial damage, as damages over time add up to substantial damage through repetitive damage, but instead it's improvement. So improvements over time add up to a substantial improvement. So the difference between substantial improvement and substantial damage is that substantial damage allows you to apply for funding, where substantial improvement makes you conform to the floodplain development permit requirements. So it isn't tied to funding at all, but rather makes you conform to floodplain development. So
it makes, instead of having a one-time substantial improvement of 50%, you add every substantial improvement up, and once it hits 50%, you have to have a floodplain development. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep. Is there one more or is that five? Let me double check here. And critical facilities, Lisa touched on. Oh, and areas behind levees, which would mean anything that is protected by a levee, the city could choose to not be protected by a levee and institute flood insurance requirements and floodplain development permits on those properties. So properties that are protected by levees would no longer be protected by levees. That's the optional language.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. I understand. Well, I won't say that. I think this is really lovely, and thank you for doing this. I always love when I can see like a track changes, but I understand it's a repeal and replace, so it doesn't really one-to-one. I will continue to, and I said this at the last meeting with Director Thorne, but I will continue to kind of hope that we reorient as a council our focus on the floodplain towards protecting homeowners and making sure that people are protected. I think there's been a lot of discussion about how much people are going to be paying, which is an important discussion to have. I just also worry that if we spend too much time talking about that, we're going to create a system like for example, the optional addition to add homes behind levees that are protected by levees to require that to be in the flood zone. I don't know enough about that to make an informed statement on it right now, but if it is something that there's a possibility that a homeowner once in 100 years or once in 50 years, whatever it looks like, has a substantial flood, I think is our duty as public servants to make sure that we are requiring the types of insurance for homeowners that will protect them. It's the reason that we require home insurance as a country and as a state and also other insurances as a city. So I want to make sure we're considering that as we move these things forward. And but this is really lovely, and thank you for doing all this work. And nice to see you here.
Alderperson Fabrizio.
I have some additional questions just about notification to the public. So can I do that for the next section? In the next section, is that what you prefer? Or?
It might be relevant to the next section. But I think if there are comments about something that is orthogonal to the items we're voting on, that might best be covered in perhaps our conversation next week with the city manager for their report, just given that.
I think since it's time sensitive, I just want to say, and also since maybe people are listening, some people are listening, there is, I remember Mike said last week, there's a phase in for the insurance. So homeowners would not be paying 100% of the insurance premium the very first year. I don't know the details, and I think that would be helpful to have that out to the public. And is it also, in fact, the June 18th is the date by which the flood insurance needs to become effective for people who are, it's not everybody who's within the floodplain, but only people who have federally backed mortgages. I just wanted to say that to clarify that for the public, right?
I'm going to recognize the city manager quickly.
So I did send out an email earlier that has a ton of information and where the city has all of this located, where it is on the website. There was a postcard that was emailed. What's very complicated about this in terms of a communication strategy is that each individual's situation in terms of whether or not they need insurance is pretty personal to that person. Mm-hmm. So like you just mentioned, it's only if they have a particular kind of federally backed mortgage that they need to get the flood insurance. I can tell you that people who have this as a requirement have been notified by their insurance companies because we've been flooded with, I'm sorry, pun intended, not intended, flooded with letters from people who are very upset about the sort of forecasting that their individual insurance company has done. So yes, the city is doing everything that we can, but the city has absolutely no ability to independently analyze what that particular homeowner's needs are in terms of insurance. That has to be done by the insurance company. Mm-hmm. And those insurance companies have indeed been notifying those homeowners for an ongoing basis. And that's been going on since we started doing this public process on the city's flood mitigation efforts. And so if you look in your email, you'll see where all of those resources are located.
Thank you for that. I see you sent that at just before the meeting, 5:45, so I have not looked at that yet, but I absolutely will. Is there, is the city planning?
I'm so sorry. I am going to rule this as not germane.
Okay.
I do want to keep us moving on the actual legislation before us, but I think that there is appropriate time for this discussion to continue again when we cover the city manager's report. I think that is an appropriate catch-all. Further questions for Lisa or Sam? Seeing none, we do not need a roll call vote on this because it's just leaving committee. So all those in favor of moving this to our May meeting? That carries 9-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Sam, floor is yours for CRS.
Presentation on the community rating system.
Okay, bear with me while I get my screen up.
Thanks for laughing.
You're a real card.
He's really just playing for time for Sam.
I appreciate that too. That was a perfect leadway. Okay. So I'm here tonight to talk about flood insurance in the community rating system. We're here tonight because council, a previous council, maybe some of you were on it, asked staff to look into the community rating system in response to these flood maps being released. So participation in the community rating system lowers insurance for federally backed mortgages, like we had discussed. So staff were directed to directly analyze the cost versus benefits of the community rating system if the city were to apply for it. We're here to inform you of the analysis so far and what we've seen so far, not to ask you to make any decision tonight, but purely an update. So tonight's meeting, we're going to discuss what the CRS does and who participates in it. And then we're going to discuss the new flood maps and their impact on flood insurance and the community rating system. Next, we'll discuss the report created by staff and a consultant, Barton and LaJudas, that determined that we're capable of applying for the CRS and to what degree that we're capable of applying for the CRS. I'm going to say CRS a lot tonight. That stands for Community Rating System, just to get that out of the way. And then we're going to go into the opportunities that the city has with CRS. So at what level can we participate, and the impacts of the flood mitigation project on CRS. And then finally, we're going to talk about what we could possibly do next. All right, so community rating system is a points-based program that municipalities, so villages, cities, and towns, voluntarily participate in to reduce the costs of flood insurance, federally backed flood insurance, that is. And it's only for residential properties, so that's important to remember. So residential properties backed by federal flood insurance. The city actively participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which we just discussed before, which ensures residents access to flood insurance. So without participation in the NFIP, you don't have access to flood insurance. CRS lowers the rates of that federally backed flood insurance. So that's how it builds off of the National Flood Insurance Program. I think I've hit it enough times, but one more time, CRS only applies to federally backed insurance. All right, so the CRS, as I said before, is a points-based program. The city can earn points by adopting activities from a CRS activities list that's pre-approved. The more points the city earns, the higher CRS class is assigned. The higher the CRS class were assigned, the more discounts residents received on their federally backed flood insurance. As I mentioned before, it's a points-based system, and these are the types of activities that you can get points for under CRS. They range from everything like record keeping of the floodplain development permits that Lisa talked about earlier, to adopting higher regulatory standards, like preventing certain types of development within the floodplain, public outreach, like having certain information available on your website, including mapping information, real infrastructure projects like levees, and preserving or prohibiting certain type of developments in open space. So who's participating? So there are 1,501 communities nationwide that participate in the community rating system. 2 of them participate at the highest level. The majority of communities participate in the 9th through 5th levels, which offer the least amount of reductions in premiums. So 1 is the highest level, getting you a 45%, and 9 is the lowest, getting you a 5% reduction. New York State municipalities, there's 34 of them that participate in CRS. All participate within classes 7 through 9, meaning a 5 to 15% reduction in insurance rates. There's one exception to that, which is the town of Greece that participates at a class 5. They receive 25% reduction on their insurance rates. They're able to do this by prohibiting development in large areas of open spaces. They have lots of parks, I believe. So going into the onset of this project, it was pretty much determined that Ithaca would be looking similar to other New York municipalities and be applying for somewhere between classes 7 through 9. So looking at a 5 to 15% reduction in insurance premiums on federal flood insurance. Okay, so we talked about the flood maps. So FEMA announced that the new flood maps would be released for the entire county. The initial maps were in 2021. On this here, I'm calling them the 2025 maps because that's when they come into place. The old maps included roughly 100 residential properties. So properties with residential buildings located on them or a residential unit of any kind. The new maps include about 750 residential properties under the same classification. So some quick math gives you roughly 650 properties being added into the floodplain. 2025 maps take up pretty much the entire area of 1981 maps and then expand upon that. All properties mapped within the floodplain are required to purchase, or all properties mapped within the floodplain that have a federally backed mortgage are required to purchase federal flood insurance. Often private lenders have you purchase more flood insurance on top of that. So I'm going to talk about flood insurance. So the community rating system, like I mentioned before, only applies to federal flood insurance premiums. Federal flood insurance only covers up to $250,000 of building coverage. So banks may require additional insurance for residents. That's private insurance to cover the entire coverage of the building.
Just a quick question, and you may not know the answer to this. If you have a private mortgage, one that's not federally backed, and they require insurance, once the mortgage has begun, can they require that you purchase it now, or only for new mortgages that are outstanding?
I'd assume that I'm not an insurance expert. I'll get that right out up front. But I would assume that if you have a federally backed mortgage and you're going to be added into the floodplain, that you'll have to purchase flood insurance if you weren't in the floodplain when you purchased the house.
And how many houses is this impacting? Because I've heard several different numbers.
750 residential properties. I couldn't tell you how many of those are single family homes versus any type of, I could eventually maybe, but not my fingertips.
Actually, I think we have that. We might have
We
that.
might have that somewhere. Yeah. But I can tell you 750 residential properties. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about how expensive flood insurance is. And I can only speak to federal flood insurance here. FEMA estimates that flood insurance in our zip code currently is starting at around $1,800 annually premium.
And just to clarify, a bank could require more, and that is basically sort of like a gap insurance, and that they would have to do a private.
So private insurance would make that a much larger number, but the number that I have up on the screen here purely applies to federally backed flood insurance.
And theoretically, that's the least expensive way to go for that primary insurance.
So the differences between federal flood insurance and private insurance can get a little hazy, but my understanding is that private insurance is less expensive than federal insurance, but it is less, it could be considered less reliable. So as they are required to provide federal flood insurance, whereas private companies are not required to provide insurance. Okay, great. I'm going to continue. So FEMA estimates insurance rates to be about $1,800 in our zip code. So that's annually, and that's for single family homes. We've seen other estimates from third-party sources like floodsmart.gov that show extremely variable rates by property. It can be by street one house that's exactly like another house in a different part of a city can have a much different rate. So we've seen rates from $2,000 to $5,000 annually. So for the purposes of our project, we used the FEMA numbers. So please understand that we use that number to be more conservative. So that leads into the benefit cost analysis.
Can I just ask one more question about the cost? Have you found that there are any communities that have set up like a consortium so that there's, they pool their buying power and they're able to help reduce the cost for community members?
It's a great question that I don't have the answer to. I have not looked into that. Okay. So working with consultant Barton LaJudas, we identified the cost to the city of administrating the community rating system against the savings incurred to residents. And so to be clear, residents are policyholders of those who purchase flood insurance. So the city costs were set to be staff time and limited to that. And the savings were limited to the federal insurance discounts. Does that make sense? We're weighing staff time against flood insurance savings. I understand that there might be more benefits, even financial benefits that are indirect, but for the purposes of this project, that's what we are weighing. So savings to residents are through federal flood insurance premiums, which I mentioned, and are collected by the policyholders. Savings are for the policyholders and not for the city, so city expends and residents save. Identifying the costs and savings was really crucial in developing this cost-benefit analysis for obvious reasons. This isn't to say that there aren't other benefits from as well. Okay, so working with a consultant, staff from across the city were interviewed and current city systems were reviewed to determine how many CRS-related activities the city is already doing. So those activities that earn you points that I mentioned earlier, the goal of this was to figure out how much is the city already doing to mitigate flood risk and get points for towards CRS. Also identified were activities that the city could take on rather easily to achieve more points in the future. A benefit cost analysis was created to measure the cost of the city against the savings for the residents. The benefit cost analysis is able to account for several different scenarios. Importantly, the requirements for the CRS were identified. Yep. Okay, so these are the results of that. So starting, it was found that with what the city is actively doing, so with those activities, we could apply for the CRS and at best get a class 8, meaning at best a 10% reduction in federal insurance premiums. It was found that with the city adopting more activities related to CRS, that we could get up to a class 6. And then it was also found that the higher levels of classes were not available and were not feasible, as the activities themselves were not feasible for the city to take on. So the max number of points that were found to be feasible only got us to a class 6 if we were to adopt every single option. So as the city stands right now, with what we are currently doing, all it would take was an application process to get into the CRS at a class 9 or 8.
Excuse me, could you give a couple examples of what we could potentially do to get up to 7 or 6 and the kinds of things that are out of reach that would get us to the higher discount?
Sure. So it might just be a matter of collecting or putting out public information that we don't have access to right now, or we don't have right now. So that might be one example. Another example is adopting higher regulatory standards that we would find acceptable, but don't currently have. So requiring people potentially to raise their buildings higher or improve their buildings more often. Things like that would get us more points. So things that we're not doing currently, but we found could be feasible to do. Points that were found to be unfeasible were like preserving open space or prohibiting development in the floodplain.
Alderperson Keel.
So as I mentioned before, the report included a number of scenarios. I'm going to highlight 2 that we believe to be rather important and potentially more likely. For both scenarios, we assume that the city would participate in the CRS at a class 8 or 9, which I mentioned before, receives 5 to 10% reductions on premiums. This, as was presented last week, DPW has been working with Barton LaJudas on that flood hazard mitigation project, which would eventually remove parcels from the floodplain, separate from the, yeah. Success of the flood mitigation project is measured by properties being removed from the floodplain. The more properties removed from the floodplain, the fewer people will need to purchase flood insurance. The fewer people who purchase flood insurance, the less people benefit from community rating system, thus the less savings we receive citywide. So while individuals who were required to purchase flood insurance would see the same reductions, less individuals would be seeing those reductions. Okay, so for both scenarios, we made a few assumptions and I will run through those now. Both scenarios take into account increases in premiums and staff salary over 20 years. So we use contracts for staff salary to guess that. And then for premiums, FEMA releases some information about that. Both scenarios assume staff time will be part-time. Both scenarios assume 70% of properties that are residential properties that are mapped will purchase this flood insurance. So those who don't have federal-backed mortgages or who bought their properties in cash may not purchase flood insurance. Those are some examples. So the reason why we use 70% is because that's the current adoption in our zip code. So currently 70% of parcels mapped are purchasing flood insurance. And the last assumption is that we would only participate at a class 8 or 9, receiving only 5 to 10% discounts on premiums. Okay, so I'm going to run you through the first scenario. First scenario does not include the flood mitigation project at all and shows the condition before the project is ever completed or if the project is not successful. We expect this to be the scenario, we expect this to be a likely scenario. In this scenario, we show net savings with our participation in CRS to be collected by the policyholders over 20 years, up to about $1.5 million over 20 years citywide. The second scenario is if the flood mitigation project is completely successful to the fullest extent possible. So 75% of the properties are removed from the floodplain, meaning 75% fewer people would be participating in purchasing flood insurance, which means CRS would be less effective. The models for this showed that participating at a class 8 or 9 would result in loss to the city. All right, so what did we learn throughout this process? We learned that the city is already performing a number of CRS-related activities, which actually mitigate flood risk in real time. So that's important to recognize and acknowledge. It's enough to get us in at a class 8 or 9 with just an application. We also learned that classes 8 and 9 would only result in minor savings, as is right now. $1.6 million over 20 years over a population of 30,000. Somebody could do the math. To achieve higher reductions in premiums, the city will need to adopt more practices that mitigate flood risk in the floodplain. That's a requirement if we want higher premium reductions in premiums. We also know that applying to the CRS will take some staff time, and administrating the CRS will take some staff time as well. So it's an ongoing staff investment. So what do we do next? So both of these are not mutually exclusive, certainly. But the first option would be to participate in the community grading system. So we need to confirm feasibility, meaning interview staff to identify exactly what activities we would be applying for points for and at what class, so whether a class 8 or 9 or a plan for a future class even. Then we need to assign staff to be dedicated to the application process, apply, be assigned a CRS class, and then there's an annual recertification for the program and a recertification every 5 years for the program. And of course, there's always pursuing other opportunities with staff time that mitigate flood risk. And I threw those up on the screen as they were some recommendations from staff and the consultant.
Thank you very much. Alderperson Keel, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and I really appreciate knowing about this. My first question directly for you is, do you know of any communities where implementing CRS programs or initiatives lowers the cost of private insurance. Is that something that private insurance companies take into account, the overall CRS rating of a community?
That's not something I've heard. No.
Okay.
But not to say that the actions and individual activities that the city adopt would not impact those, could potentially impact
Okay.
those. So yeah, that makes sense.
That does. Thank you so much. So one of the things I think this is obviously the flood mitigation stuff is something that we're all going to have to be dealing with for many years to come. I do have a question about, and this is not going to be, this is more of this is not a question for you guys and more of a discussion for us as Common Council about our direction as a city, what we're doing to mitigate floods, what we're doing to decrease the cost to homeowners. We just approved, or we will approve, I think, we approved this month $50,000 for a new study to try to overwrite the LOMR that the FEMA put in place. I have no idea what it would compare to in terms of total cost savings. We invested that in improvements in the city of Ithaca, in the floodplain area. But I also have to imagine that we are talking about building 6-foot flood channels in downtown Ithaca that may not work, that FEMA may not like. And I just did a quick Google search, and you can use FEMA grants to do CRS community improvement projects. And so part of my thought process on this is, why are we trying to decrease by 300 or 200 houses, whatever the actual number is, the amount of houses in the floodplain, while everyone else still pays full price, when we could instead use that money that we were going to use to build massive flood walls in downtown Ithaca to increase green space or help flood-proof buildings, or I don't know. I've got a little fun fact that I just found while Googling this is that the CRS coordinators manual, which lists all of the activities, was taken down by the Trump administration. So that's cool. Good. Yeah, I found a copy in the Wayback Machine, but that's super, super helpful of them. So anyways, I don't know. These are just things I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering what the direction we want to go in as a city. Are we really trying to fully mitigate the fact that we live on a lake? Or are we trying to design systems as a city that are good urban design to mitigate the impacts of living on a lake? So that's probably not going to be honestly a decision for any of us. This will probably be 5 years down the road when we make any substantive decisions on this, but something I think we should think about.
Alderperson Brown.
I'm for one, this was long. It's something that I probably need to see a few more times, talking about getting the community to understand. This looks like a whole big thing. However, my concern is about FEMA, right? From what one of our council people sent to us, is pretty much they're not, why are we working on, okay, because CRS is through FEMA, right?
That's correct.
Right, and it sounds like they shutting FEMA down, so why are we even going through, I mean, why we're not looking at other avenues, for one? The $50,000 that we were asked about last week about using that money to redo flood maps type thing is like, I'm trying to figure out, why is this conversation when we really should be talking about, is FEMA really shut down or not? Right. I mean,
Alderperson, if I may, I think
Okay,
I think
sorry.
no. I think it's a good question. I think similar to a very equally valid question raised by Alderperson Fabrizio on a different topic about federal flow-through grants, right? Like, yes, the current administration might decide to kill FEMA.
Yeah.
Until such time that they do that, we have to explore the avenues that exist to us. And I think to your question, and I'll pose this to staff, but why are we not exploring other avenues? I think these are the avenues that exist for us, right? I mean,
At the moment, yeah. I mean, we could look at other things. Sam had we just threw some ideas up on the screen, you know, flood-proofing buildings to raise utilities, there are things that you can do to decrease your flood insurance premiums that are structural to your home, but we would have to figure out a way to get funding for something like that and then deploy it to individual property owners and things like that. But there are other things we could do to impact flooding, but for the moment, we do have to comply with FEMA rules. And this is a FEMA program.
Alderperson Fabrizio.
Yeah, I was wondering, do they give any points for like upstream mitigation? Because that seems like something that we're not, like as a city, we haven't really maybe reached out to, you know, work with the county, work with neighboring municipalities. I mean,
Well, we do actually. We have a watershed coordinator position in the city that
Okay.
coordinates with through the whole our water supply watershed.
and are we looking at the flood risk through that lens?
Well, they have a floodplain. They have and this is going off topic, but there is a watershed management plan that I think you adopted last year.
So maybe
and
that could be part of our,
It is part of the scoring, I think, already, isn't it? The watershed. management
Yeah,
plan?
yep.
Yeah.
So
that's
the
part of it.
watershed coordinator, along with the county and cooperative extension, were all interviewed to understand what's happening in Ithaca and the community. So the county has a certain number of actions that it also performs and adopts, and those have impacts in the city. So the county planning department was also interviewed.
so that's already included in the percentage that you think we would be eligible for?
In terms of achieving the CRS point,
Yes.
yes.
We have a giant spreadsheet of all the activities that we're currently doing or could do. We're happy to share it with you. We didn't want to, I mean, it's a really big, boring spreadsheet, so we're happy to share it with you so you can get a flavor for what.
Yeah,
the
no,
activities are.
I'm just wondering, all of those, is there anything that seems achievable, like in the near future, that would potentially impact the premiums that people are going to be looking at doing this summer?
Are you asking kind of about like low hanging fruit? in
Yeah,
the CRS?
exactly,
Like what are some easy
exactly.
points to
Thank
pick
you.
up that we don't have now? I think like public outreach.
Yeah.
And adopting development standards that seem reasonable or would be the lowest hanging fruit. Mapping. We have a wonderful GIS department here that's really well known, and getting some resources out like that.
Alderperson Litterman.
Sure. First of all, thank you. That was a great presentation, and I love a good cost benefit analysis. I was curious, if I show how much extra staff time and money would it take us to put us in that sort of, I don't remember what the point level is, but the 10 to 15% or the 15 to 20% range right there.
Go ahead.
It's really hard to really estimate how much time that would take. It would need some more interviews of staff to really find out what exactly is feasible. It was more of like of what's the glass ceiling here. Does that answer your
They're
question?
more significant. We can send you the information. It's more significant and a higher volume of restrictive legislation and staff time. It's like a organization-wide coordination. So the staff
Okay.
time would be to coordinate all the different activities and also to make sure they get done and have staff over multiple departments implementing these activities.
So that would be the increase in time over as of just assembling the application, but also like coming up with policy goals and then determining what, and then bringing those activities and then adopting those activities, right? And then applying for the CRS points after that.
And if we were, just two more questions, if we were to say we're going to keep current practices and we're going to apply with those practices, would we have to do any other legislative changes to memorialize those current practices? So we wouldn't have to adopt like additional local laws that would solidify that we're going to continue to do.
Some other things in that first tranche that is something we have to adopt.
I don't believe so. There's some prerequisites with like with our participation with the
We have to adopt
NFIP.
the local law.
We have to be
Okay.
in good standing with the NFIP and have proven records for about a year before application.
And then with just that current standards that or practice that we have right now, how much staff time would it take, do you think, to put together the application and get into that lower tier of the program?
You're estimating a part-time position. So whether that's the hiring of a new staff member that's part-time or assigning existing staff, we did models that compared quarter-time to half-time positions.
It's kind of what we learned from talking to people.
Mhm.
So it's their concentrated effort. So a lot of effort to put together the application. And then if you're going to stay in your tier, it isn't a huge amount of effort until you have to do the annual reporting and the 5-year reporting. But if you want to continually reach for higher tier, you're going to have that somebody overseeing the program and really coordinating everybody's activities.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know.
Alderperson Frizio.
I would like to see us look into some kind of consortium modeling and see if anything like that might be possible, because obviously it's more than just the city that's involved in this. So if there's a way for us to lower costs that way, I think that would be great. I'd be interested in seeing like what one of these consultant reports look like. You mentioned a couple times about the need to do more interviewing, and I'm confused a little bit, because isn't that what we paid them to do?
Sure. So we did interview people to determine at what point we can enter the CRS, and then what points we could eventually attain in the future. But there needs to be some more decision making about what the points we could attain in the future are. Does that answer your question?
What are feasible activities for the staff who have to carry these?
So the consultant identified things, and then it would have to be refined to see like, okay, what could we really pull off? Gotcha. It would be, I'd love to see the report if that's in a form you can send it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the presentation, Sam.
Thank you, everybody.
Next, I'll turn it over to the Deputy City Manager, who has an update on our encampment policy report.
All right, thank you all. And I'm joined today by our encampment response coordinator, Kanish Fatima, who has been working on this with us as well. Momentarily, I'll share my screen. And I think so. It's a lot of pages. I don't know how many exactly. Excellent. So this is an adapted version of the presentation that you received in the last meeting, in the March 12th meeting, I believe. We have taken feedback that was shared here at Common Council and through other stakeholder conversations over time and worked it into this presentation. So I've skipped around a few things, so it's not an exact mirror of the last presentation, and I will focus on what the changes are between the last one and this one. So I've condensed the background, but just as a reminder, this follows several years of city efforts related to encampment response activities and the implementation of the pilot administrative policy in question, which was put into effect in 2024 with interventions called out within that policy to support people living outside in the city of Ithaca and relocating to an area where we are temporarily allowing camping. So that intervention section of the policy is really what is leading to the recommendations that are within this report. And you'll remember from the last presentation, I went into depth on the quote unquote response protocol, which is related to how we address encampments that pop up on city-owned land spread throughout the city that are broken down into land that's actively managed. Think waterfront trail, sidewalk, active areas. Lightly managed, the pictures on the right-hand side, the area behind Lowe's or other areas that don't have active day-to-day city use. And then what's referred to in some areas, but not quite in our policy, is the non-enforcement zone, which is really the area that we're temporarily allowing camping on city-owned land. We went over how the approach of engagement with people experiencing unsheltered homelessness has worked out very well for us in this past year over the strategy that some communities use of more direct law enforcement response to individuals, or encampment sweeps, as they're often sort of seen as in other communities, or the city's sort of past practice of ignoring encampment sites. We went over that 20 encampment sites were addressed in 2024, and that 2 large area cleanups were done of encampment sites in the city, both one in 2024 and one in 2025. This is just a reminder of the geography of where we're talking about when I talk about the southwest parcel, the non-enforcement zone, the area that we temporarily allow camping. That is this area directly to the north of the Tompkins County Solid Waste Center and directly to the west of the Walmart Crunch Fitness area. So you can see that on the map there in the aerial photo. Many slides in the last presentation gave you a background of what we learned from feedback, so I'm not going to go into depth, but I have summarized that here. We learned from our 2024 work about the challenges that people face and why they have been displaced from stable housing situations and are using encampment sites in the city. That's on the top left box. The top right box just gives a very high-level overview of the data that we learned from surveying people with lived experience of homelessness. That's people who are currently experiencing homelessness, have experienced homelessness in the past in our community. I added a box on the bottom for, I just called it open dialogue. These are all groups that we are continuing to have conversations with and that we are in touch with. So the committee continues to meet. The local continuum of care is our key resource on this issue. We've had excellent conversations with Tompkins County, including Tompkins County Administration, Housing and Economic Development Committee at the county, and their environmental health unit out of the whole health department. We've continued to provide updates to a local homeless and housing task force. It's open to the public, and the last meeting had 50+ people in it. It was excellent. And we continue to communicate with volunteers, advocates, and I should have put neighbors there as well. And we're continually open to having more dialogue with any and all of these groups. I have some new background for you today that is related to emergency response. This is not detailed in a narrative form in the report, but I'm going to walk through some graphs and charts as it relates to calls for service for law enforcement, fire, and EMS to the areas on the map here on the right. So our system has some improvements to make on both how we label places that people are responding to and the number of sort of locations. As you'll probably remember in the last one, we talked a little bit about addressing in the southwest parcel. It's very hard for someone who's responding to a call for service to know exactly where they're responding to. Right now, it pops up on the screen as Jungle 2, maybe with some details, right? That can be much, more humanizing language to use, like Encampment Site 2 is probably more appropriate than Jungle 2. And we could also have some details within it. So later I'll tell you more about our plans for addressing. I just want to acknowledge the limitations here within that. And I put a little asterisk on the law enforcement data that you're going to see, because after further analysis and conversation with Chief Kelly, many of the most frequent call type that you'll see are actually proactive policing for some of our officers who have relationships with people who are using encampment areas and living outdoors, who are going to do just property checks on their own volition. Here's an example of that. So this is 2023 responses. This is all from the 911 center from Tompkins County that I've sent. So you'll see Jungle 1 in quotes there. I'm going to go back so you can see the map. This is the red circle on the top right. So this is the area at the Brindley Street Triangle behind Agway that was cleaned up in 2024. And you'll see in the second data slide how that cleanup impacted calls for service. So the blue dotted line is the trend line for law enforcement responses. This is 2023. And you can see that that trend line increases a bit over time. I think the total number of calls in this are 71, perhaps. Blue line that bumps up and down there is law enforcement. The red is fire, and the green is EMS response, Banks ambulance. And on the right-hand side, you can see a quick analysis of the call types. It's very small to see here. The two that bump out all the way to 13 calls, first one is property check. and the second one is outside fire. So I want you to think about both of these as we go through the next several slides. Property check, that's mostly that proactive policing, community engagement type activity from some of our officers. I would leave it to Chief Kelly to describe some of that in more detail, as he did very well for our committee in the past. The outside fire, this number 13 in that Brindley Street Triangle area in 2023 is the highest number of fire calls for service that you'll see. Fire calls, I'm not a fire expert at all. They're actually lower across the board than I would have expected going into this with the data. So I'll click now to 2024. Same location, Brindley Street Triangle area, Jungle 1. You see it precipitously drops off, and that's related to the city's addressing of that encampment site per the policy. So that notice of violation from Tompkins County Environmental Health came through. Outreach workers worked and police officers worked with the individuals who were living in the area, asked them to relocate. There was also the housing surge that happened, bringing people into the Asteri building. I do not know the overlap exactly, but these things all came together as a sort of a confluence to make this impact. So you can see the calls really drop off. Next two slides are quote unquote Jungle 2. And this does include the gate area and the actual parcel itself. This is 2023. And again, this is the area behind Walmart that we're looking at here. You can see the total number of calls. I think this year is 80, 81 maybe, and the next year is 90. So it's pretty steady. The trend line shows some general increase over the course of the year there. But you can see, I think fire is one of the most interesting pieces here. There's not a lot of fire calls for service. Of course, any fire call is scary, and some fires are not reported to our fire department. But this is, I think, a good indication of the amount of responses that we're doing to the area. And these slides will be available afterward, and I'll work some of this into the next version of the report so people can do a deeper dive if you'd like. One other piece I should add, Jungle 2, as we're looking at it, I'll just click to 2024 so you can see. This is behind Walmart and also accessible from between Lowe's and Crunch Fitness through Fairgrounds Memorial Parkway. There are other addresses that get called for service for things that are related to someone experiencing homelessness, but it's not coded in the emergency response data that we have access to. So I get the question from some people when I've talked about this of, well, what about the thefts that happen at Walmart where it's people who are living behind Walmart? There's a couple of ways to look at that, but we don't have data on, the 911 center does not have data on who's committing those thefts. And you know, something that some folks who work in the homeless response system like to remind me and others is we don't ask about the addresses of other people who are committing larceny or other types of crimes like that. So it often can lead down the road of criminalizing homelessness if we're not very careful about how we're talking about that data. And I cannot pretend to be an expert on different types of law enforcement calls for service and who's committing what types of crimes. So just a sort of asterisk and caveat with it that we have the data that we have related to these locations. There are other calls that happen around. There are other issues related to people experiencing homelessness or crimes of poverty, et cetera, that at this time I can't speak much further on. But you can see 2024, just as 2023, shows a slight general, slight trend increase over the course of the year. But fire calls continue to remain at a max of 2 per month. Of course, the property check number for law enforcement is very high here as well. So there's a lot more analysis to be done here. I'm doing some more call type analysis to maybe do a few other types of graphs, but I do think this is important for the group to know. This is the highest number of calls per year to either any of the sites that I have for quote unquote Jungle 2 in 2024, and that is 90 calls back there, but upwards of 20 of them may have been officer-initiated property checks. So that's a general bit about that data. Recent updates that were made. So we took the feedback that we got from This group, we met with residents at Nate's Floral Estates. We've spoken with different facets of Tompkins County who work on different areas of this issue. The committee, of course, and other organizations that serve people experiencing homelessness. So we heard loud and clear in the last Common Council meeting that we needed to put more emphasis on, if we are to move forward with a navigation hub, more emphasis on those hub resources being available for anyone who is homeless or housing insecure, not just people who are living in encampment sites. It was already in the report, but I've moved it up and made it bold and made it very clear. We've heard more focus on fire prevention is needed. We've had some excellent conversations related to fire prevention that I think after conversations with specifically some residents at Nate's Floral Estates who, the people who live close to some of these areas where fires are, bear the brunt of that, whether it be air quality or worried about the fire impacting them as a fire. So we had excellent conversations with the fire marshal and IFD chief and have some proposals worked in around how we might do more fire prevention efforts in the future. I'm really glad with how that's gone. We did the analysis of the calls for service that I just went over. There's a need to continue to further clarify this proposal and this work being temporary and pilot program status. This relates to two things. One, we know that Tompkins County is planning on building an emergency shelter, and we're hoping that that shelter is going to be as good as it can be to serve the needs of the people in our community. So the work that we're doing should help fill some time gap until that service, which we expect to be, as excellent as it can be for the people that need to be served, is built. And we're also, reiterating this temporary pilot piece because you'll hear in a bit around campground regulations as it relates to the southwest parcel. Those campground regulations are complicated, and our best path to achieving what we need to get a campground permit will require us having a time-limited waiver. And I'll get into some details, but it is important for us to continue to think through the lens of temporary and pilot. And then the last piece is we've added language around navigation hub partnerships, including through Tompkins County departments. And you'll see, for example, in the report, there's some references to the county's strategic plan, which states that they should work to get some of the services out of traditional county buildings and out closer to the people that they're intending to serve. Navigation Hub is a perfect example of something that would fit that strategic plan item for the county. We went through this in depth in the last meeting, so unless you have questions, I will sort of click through this. These are just the recommended policy edits that we have made. We have changed one line in the draft policy between the last meeting you heard about this and now, and that is related to fire safety. That's why that line is in italics there. And so the policy has more language around fire prevention in it as it relates to allowing an area for temporary camping. So here we get into some of the proposed mapping the map on the left is the one that you've looked at a bunch. It's earlier in the slideshow. It's actually an addendum to the policy that currently exists for the city. And the area in green, and I know that the colors aren't easy for everyone. There are 28 acres in the map on the left. This map predates me, but I have a lot to learn on how to make it accessible for everyone. So I'm sorry about that. I'm happy to use a pointer after if need be. But 28 acres in the map on the left are considered in the policy as it stands today suitable for camping. The map on the right is where we intend to sort of head with the map. We'll have a new, closer to the GIS version to add to the policy for when you next consider it. But I'm going to walk you through some pieces of the map on the right. I'm going to use my cursor. So a couple of changes that are being currently proposed to how we sort of set up where camping would be temporarily allowed. These red areas that you see, this strip of land here to the northeast or northwest, sorry, and this eastern sort of area here by a drain ditch, really. Those are both marked as what we would potentially not allow camping in the area. They're currently in the area that allows it. But we would propose to remove them from that area because they are the hardest to access for first responders who would need to serve someone. They're some of the wetter or least desirable areas for people to camp that are produce less, they're less sanitary just because of the standing water or just water in general. So we propose to remove those from what's allowed for camping. The dark line that goes around, this is the access road. So you can see there are several small improvements related to that, including widening it, adjusting it to what is actually being used right now, as this is an active DPW site at the top. So this new line represents what's more accurate to true to form. There are small dots that work their way around this line. You probably can't see it here very well, but those dots represent LED solar lights to light the path that would be there. Yes? Oh, go ahead.
So that's 20 feet now, but the IFD proposed to have a 20 feet wide road for fire access.
And that's that road is 20 feet wide, or they proposed to widen it to 20 feet?
Yes.
And it's not paved right now?
Correct.
Okay. Is the plan to pave it?
No, the plan would be to use millings, which is the material gathered after getting a road ready for paving. Old paving, old asphalt chipped up. It's something you could drive a fire truck on, kind of piece. Yeah, any of those decisions would be worked on with IFD and DPW together, and they're both supportive of sort of widening the road. And for the fire department, it's really turnaround areas that are important for their larger apparatus. So then here, you'll see the other circles here, and I'll just show you a zoomed in version in a moment, sort of a scattered site, sort of future camp plots. And you'll see a little bit more about that as we go, but we've mapped out, we want to offer some scattered plots throughout the area that are prepped for people to camp in, that are healthier, safer, easier to access, and use lighting and the other tools. There's a box down here that you can see. This is where we might put an amenities hub. Hub is probably not the right word for it because we're calling something else a navigation hub, so it gets a little confusing. But that might be where the potable water, toilets, maybe bike rack type locker system, or other things would exist in one central area for those. So we are trying to move from the previous map to the one on the right so that it more clearly explains what site improvements we might make. And the blob in the middle is sort of showing that it is a wet and forested area that we'd like to avoid adding new campsites into. It does cross over with some wetlands as well, and I can dig into the wetlands later if need be. So here is a little clearer version of what we were talking about, and you can sort of follow the number on the right with where it's listed on the map on the left. This zoomed in version, I think, is something that's really useful to look at. So this is a cutout of one of those sort of scattered campsite areas that you would see in the map on the left. Each of these circles, these three, these are 1,250 square foot campsites, which would pertain to the regulations for the New York State campsite regulations for how big an area might be to designate a campsite. The smaller dots that are spread throughout would be lighting. Lights have to, you could put lights wherever you want, but we would want to well light the area. So you do a calculation of how high it is mounted to a tree versus how far apart they are to make sure that you don't have areas that are dark if you want to truly light an area. And the small crosshair in the center is a fire ring. So I'll show you a photo in a little bit of a fire ring, but imagine you're camping at Buttermilk State Park and you can imagine what the sort of fire ring is. Those require a 3-meter distance between the fire ring and a campsite or a tent or other materials so as to not cause fire. So we do have some interventions that can more safely help people use fires for cooking and warmth in the future if we are to put them into place. The next piece here is the addressing piece. So I mentioned before, right now, this whole thing is referred to as Jungle 2 and Jungle 2 Gate. we have talked a lot, and thanks to some of our committee members for some proposals around the addressing, and Patrick, your grid system, we've been thinking a lot through that concept. This area is not a perfect square in any means, and where people would live versus not live is also super complicated based on the topography. So this is just a proof of concept of saying, if we would map the area so that first responders and others, outreach workers, and the navigation hub, there were maps available to discern what's in the area, and then color code and number it. So 7, you can see that in the center there, would have 12 by 12 metal signs and then plastic, trail markers put on trees in the area to clarify that that's the zone that someone would be living in. So that's what they would call in if they called for service, or if an outreach worker or someone was bringing someone out to the area or helping them understand where they would be accessing a campsite, they would say, oh, well, zone 5 is really not super occupied right now. We know you don't like to be around neighbors. That might be a really great place for you. Here's where you would go. Or, hey, you like building community and want to be around like-minded individuals. Maybe zone 15 is best for you in the future. So this is, proof of concept of where we might head with the with that. And we got a tour of the city's sign shop for DPW. If any of you ever get a chance to do that, I recommend it. It was pretty awesome. They have a lot of cool ability to make signs for the whole city back there. And they're excited to work with us. Yes. Yeah. Anyways, we went over these 2 recommendations in the last meeting. 1 is open a navigation hub, and 2 is make livability improvements to Southwest Park. And we have several items I want to share with you here. So what you see already on the screen are the things that we presented in the last meeting. And what's going to be in this box are what has changed in the report from the last meeting until now. So building acts for the navigation hub that we may open, having a building access and surveillance camera system similar to what's used in other city facilities. Something that is staffed by 2 to 3 people for oversight and resource navigation. We spoke with, it's not a navigation hub in the exact form that we're thinking of it, but Cortland has a space that operates out of a church that's called the Grace Space. They partner and work with people who are using the Code Blue system in Cortland. So they had a lot of great things for us to learn and provided us with their policies, but they really recommended 2 to 3 people on site at the space at any given time. So I think that'll be very important for us. And then considering partnerships with Tompkins County. So Tompkins County has, they have ongoing sheltering and homelessness response activity and staffing, and leveraging partnerships with them, I think, will be critical to make sure that this is possible for the city, frankly, with our limited resources. And they are very interested in working with us on this. Same concept here on the Southwest improvement slide. What's in these 2 boxes I'll show are the updated pieces. So making it clear we want to do leveled surfaces for camping, additional signage in lightly managed areas saying that camping isn't allowed. So for example, behind Lowe's, adding more signage, or other areas that pop up in the future. Enhanced small firefighting apparatus. It's a long way to say much easier to use fire truck that's smaller and easier to get into the non-enforcement zone quicker and fight things like brush fires. We heard, loud and clear, like I mentioned before, that fire is a concern that a lot of people who are neighbors have, and the fire department, sort of when we talked to them, recommended that we consider upgrading some equipment that would make it much easier to respond quickly to any fires that did pop up in this area or could turn into a brush fire. So I think that would be an excellent potential use of our capital related funding if it would help prevent fires from getting out of hand in this area.
Can you say more specifically what that would be?
Some numbers and options are being considered, and like I said before, I'm not an expert on the operations of our fire department, but I think it would look more like a 1-ton pickup truck with EMS equipment and firefighting equipment on it, rather than driving an entire ladder, or an entire pumper truck or something back into this area. So something that is smaller easier to drive in a wooded area, something that you could actually fight a fire from inside the truck, other pieces like that. So, if we're planning the costs of doing all of the road work to improve all of the roads versus the cost to having a better truck to respond to those fires and also serve other areas of the city as needed, that truck that might be able to do those responses might be a much better bang for our buck than improving roads that might not be used as much over time.
And I have a question about the next one, about
Fire rings or listed devices for open burning? Yes, what's your question?
So, because I do know that there's been a lot of concern about burning of all kinds of materials, toxic materials, and really just noxious sort of stuff that really impacts a lot of property owners nearby. And since there is really no open burning allowed within the city, what are you looking at to do here?
So as it pertains to some of the campground regulations, and there are certain items that can be burned that are not as noxious, right? So you have firewood or charcoal or other things. So these fire rings would be designed, and hopefully we would be able to make some materials accessible for people to burn for warmth in a campground-like setting that are not plastics or other contaminated items. So we would be working on encouraging positive behavior by making sure that people have access to safer things to use.
So you would be excluding this area from the open fire regulation that we have in the rest of the city?
Do you have something?
I was just going to note, I'm not exactly sure. I want to look into that because I know, like in Stewart Park, for example, you can burn charcoal to grill on the 4th of July with your kids.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think at a park, that's
but
true.
this technically would fall into that category. I'm just saying this might not be something we'd have to overtly accept. It might just fall under the broader state regulation once we're authorized as a campsite.
Yeah, and I'll have to talk with the fire department about what our regulations are around open burning. I'm not 100% certain, but it would fall under the campground regulations as it relates to burning. So the 3 meters away from the fire ring, from your tent, and those things are, and what are burned. I think if we were in a scenario where we had a permit to operate a campground, or we're working toward that, and we had people who were burning substances that did cause sort of noxious issues, we would have to address those and continue to encourage positive behavior with residents of the area, because we wouldn't want to lose our permit. So it would actually incentivize the city to help people burn things that are safer for them and the environment and the neighbors. Dead tree removal, potential installation of cameras, and then inclusive placemaking. So the inclusive placemaking thing, I just want to hang on for a second. We cleaned up the area, Jungle 1, quote unquote, that I showed earlier, the Brindley Street Triangle, and there was some fencing put up. And a lot of people would refer to things like fencing or other things as sort of hostile architecture, things that don't encourage community use of the area. And we want to potentially improve and invest in some of the areas that we clean up so they're better for the neighborhood and better for people who live there. And with the capital funding that the council has put forward, we have a genuine opportunity, I think, to improve some of those areas. Yes, Phoebe, sorry about that.
No. I have some concern about, or I want clearer information about installation of cameras at IPD's justification. So are you asking cameras that are located at IPD that will have an eye on people in that area? Because that sounds a little, once again, about invading people's privacy, right? So I want to have a better understanding of what that means.
That's a great question.
Installation of cameras.
There is a new paragraph in the report that I think is a little bit more, that clarifies it more clearly. But right now, our exterior cameras that exist in the city outside of what we have on city buildings are on the commons, and those are used for things like investigations. There's no active monitoring of those cameras, like constantly watching them. They're sort of, the footage is gone back to when an investigation occurs. So I think that things that fall within surveillance cameras as it relates to investigations is in IPD's jurisdictions, probably a better word than justification. I think we would need it justified if it were to be added to our installation plan through the IPD lens of investigations or other sort of active work that they do. But the city also has a policy regarding security cameras and invasion of privacy as well. So it would have to follow the city's policy as well. Of course, good question. And that's another area that I'm learning about as we go. So thank you for asking the questions to help clarify. And the campground regulations piece, if we make improvements, it may initiate our need to obtain the permit. It's important to think about this as a 2 to 3 year pilot improvement period, and we may seek variances and or waivers for compliance with those environmental health regulations. And that would be based, any waiver or variance that we get is based on alternative measures to protect public health. So if we couldn't put showers in this area, for example, which is we went over in the last presentation, having a navigation hub close by with those resources really aids our ability to obtain a permit with a waiver, because something is available nearby that helps serve that purpose in a safer, more sanitary environment than we might be able to provide in the outdoor space. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in addition to the activities-related kinds of work that you were envisioning the county might be able to provide for the hub, what else were you envisioning the county's involvement would be for this program?
It's a great question. And we've been talking with the county administrator about their interest in supporting us. So I think the first goal from our end that I see is coverage and sort of maximizing the staffing to make a successful navigation hub. That I feel like is the core. We have limited operational funds that are available to us. So if we were to hire staff or really staff this at the level that it needed to be, that would eat up all the funds available and more, which we don't want to add more to our already strained budgets if we can find partnerships to cover it in those ways. So that's one. The second piece is making some of their programming that already exists available in the space. So right now we've heard from several people that there are some barriers to accessing entitlement programs. There's paperwork, there's inability to bring a pet into a space, like an office with a case manager. What if those case managers weren't in the traditional county office space and they came and had a chance to operate out of a space at a navigation hub? So I think that is a really key partnership for how it will impact the people seeking the services. They would have easier, quicker access where they already are to those services that they're entitled to.
And just a follow-up, so since the county budget season is starting, is this something that you're talking about with the county for getting it into their budget season coming up for 2026?
I will say yes, but the key questions that are outstanding is if we accept this report, if council accepts the report and we're able to begin implementation, it'll make that conversation much easier from our end, because we will know the goal of council. So that, I want to say that first. The second piece is in the Housing and Economic Development Committee meeting that I presented a similar slideshow to, just to give them an update at the county. Legislator Travis Brooks started asking the county administrator about some pre-existing funding that may still be available for an RFP that was done for something similar to a navigation hub. So there may be existing dollars available. Those questions have not been answered yet, so I don't know the answer to that. And the third thing is, we are very limited on the real estate options for a navigation hub. It is a very, Route 13 and the whole area around the southwest parcel, it's pretty full. There are not a lot of areas for lease or for rent or for us to do. So I don't want to get into too much detail on that in this setting, but it's all really going to depend on what type of navigation hub we're able to pull off. Because if it's a very small area where it's limited services, the county may not be as interested, or if it's a larger area, we might have other flexibility to partner with them. So there's some unknowns which come up when we're moving really quickly on something, so we're kind of balancing those pieces.
But the priority would be to find an existing building. You're not talking about building a new structure.
That is correct. Building a new structure is
And do you have an estimate on square footage that you would need?
I don't think we have a current estimate on square footage that we would need. I think it would range on what's available. We have some elements that we feel are really crucial to have, like showers, laundry, storage spaces, office spaces to meet with people. So we're already talking a couple thousand square feet as a baseline.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I just want to let you finish because I have a few questions. And are you almost finished?
Almost done. And I'll fly through this. I'm sorry. When we think about those Southwest improvements, I just wanted to give you some examples of the types of built environment that you might see if we're seeing these things come to fruition. So these, solar lights that can be tree mounted, solar lights that can be tree mounted to light a road, a potable water station with a water bottle filling area that is freeze resistant, a cleared site with mulch put down and leveled area for someone to camp in that's more dignified and accessible, a fire ring with a cooking implement sort of added to it. Those location markers that might have both numbers and colors for people to navigate the area. Toilets are a much more complicated ongoing question with environmental health, so I'm not over-promising with any toilet design at this time. But you could imagine a compost toilet or a toilet with a buried septic system or some other areas that may be available to us. But this is sort of how you might envision the built environment, what we might be spending that money on as it relates to improving the area for people. Budgeting for implementation, a reminder that we really want to have a phased-in approach, see what works and continue down those paths as we go. And a reminder, we can only use capital funding for items that have a useful life. We do have those limited operational funds, so partnerships are important. When it comes to the navigation hub, the operational cost unknowns of staffing and rent are still unknowns. We can have some estimates, but in the report document, there are 2 tables. Those tables have some general cost estimates within them, so you can start to think about what it might cost us to do these items. The number at the bottom is probably the most consequential, is the Southwest parcel improvements. If we were to sort of go through the route of doing all the things that we mentioned for the Southwest parcel over the course of 2 years, ballpark $380,000 could be spent to do those improvements. That's less than half of what was set aside, so I think that's still relatively prudent and gives us flexibility to do things in the future. But that, I think, is a reasonable estimate of what we might be looking at to make these improvements. I'll skip over this for time. So what's next? Additional feedback, having conversations here and with other stakeholders. In order to get this on the May 7th voting meeting, a resolution will be coming to you for your next meeting, accepting the report and the policy updates that we would have. And of course, there's opportunity to give additional feedback, but the May 7th voting meeting would be when we would hope to adopt these, so we can really hit the ground running as the weather gets warmer and we're able to both implement the policy and make improvements as we go. You'll get more details on that map and the conceptual site plan. Again, we want to be flexible and phase things in. So the map is not this is exactly what will happen, but it is a conceptual understanding of what it might. And then once that policy and the resolution are updated or are adopted, we would begin implementation. So we would be working much closer with environmental health on the campground regulations. If we were to do anything related to permitting, waivers, variances, those would come back to Common Council because that's a big decision related to the city's work. And then we'd work through those navigation hub partnerships, including how we get Tompkins County to participate. And then also looking at 2026 and budgeting that may need to be done to continue some of this work, because we're going to have some additional operational funding to do this work as we move forward, especially if we make improvements and operate a navigation hub.
So thank you. Really good. I had we had a meeting today at the Housing Justice Collective, and we had some questions and stuff, and they'll probably mail that in because I just didn't get a chance. But so I want to know about this open dialogue with these 50 people that were there, and you said it's open to community. When and where do that happen?
The Homeless and Housing Task Force is operated by the Human Services Coalition of
Okay.
Tompkins County. I don't want
Okay,
to
so I
misspeak,
can
but I
check- I
think
can
it's
check
monthly.
out
But
with them.
Liddy would absolutely
With
make sure that
Liddy.
information is available to you.
Yeah, I can get that. Just was looking at, you talked a lot about, it's just a little question of when will we get our response team, unarmed responders who would be able to help out and be a part of this whole, are you putting that in when you're planning about them?
That is, I just want to answer that question directly. It is mentioned in the report as an outstanding item that definitely relates to this work, where we've heard from people that they prefer an outreach approach, in many cases over law enforcement. That backs up what we want to do around having a policing alternatives unit at the city. And
Right.
in May, I will be bringing forward a work session memo and presentation to council related to the progress around what needs to be considered to make that happen. So within the next month, more information on the outlines of that will be available.
Thank you. So you talked about that housing search piece that happened when housing search, I mean, like that housing search, and then when all those people wind up, the encampment people, a lot of people from the jungle had gotten housing.
Yes.
Right? And you were talking about the calls.
Yes.
Police calls and stuff like that, and how it fell or whatever. But all I could think of, it stopped being called over there, and now it's over where they all went to Asteri. You know what I mean? Like,
I understand.
so how do we think in a way that when we do the hubs and different things, when we getting people to where they need to be? Anyway, I think my last one is, okay, when you talk about the navigation hubs, the navigation part, right? I think it's really important that we have one, and I'm glad you said, like, it's gonna be, it won't be close. So having it over there, like somebody has said Burger King or somewhere over there, I felt like that, it left a lot of people in communities, because this whole thing is nice and stuff with me, but it leaves out a whole group of people. It leaves out all the couch surfers, and when I think about who is in the encampments, it isn't the people that, it's white people, right? 98% of them, right? And not saying that they don't deserve housing, they definitely do. But what are we working on for other people as a city, right? If that makes sense. So I was thinking of, when you talk about the hubs, that we think about making hubs at different locations, right? And I think you talked about that when you talked about working with other organizations and other people, when we began to do more around the navigation hub, right? So that they can be in communities where other people, maybe other people can have access to it. But overall, your plan was just really, really great. Thank you.
I've got a couple of hands. I might just, before I acknowledge some of my colleagues, just also acknowledge that we have 1 hour remaining for this, the item that had been added to the agenda, and our series of executive sessions. Yes, series. So I would actually maybe encourage colleagues to scope their comments for our team here toward the presentation itself, and then maybe reserve report-related comments for next week when we'll be discussing that resolution. Alderperson St. Perez, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the focus on coordination with the county. And please, can we rename one of the hubs something else? Otherwise, we're going to end up getting them confused at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Navigation hub and amenities area, I think is really the way to think about it.
Alderperson Shapiro.
Thank you. And I'm apologies if my comment, I was a little late, so apologies. I noticed the desire to kind of get this to the May 7th voting meeting, and I can appreciate wanting to move forward with actionable steps in a timely manner. I thought one of the things that was important to just state to the room and to the audience is that we did get there was a little bit of press in the Ithaca Voice about some of the work that we were talking about, and it seemed to misrepresent some of the discussions that took place in the committee. But I just wanted to, I didn't know if you mentioned that we were also putting together a press release that we were hoping to get out, hopefully well in advance of the May 7th meeting, because I think it's important that the community hears from us about what we're trying to accomplish before we get to any place where we might be voting on something.
Yeah, great question. The press release went out this Monday, and it does link to the report. That is one challenge with some of the media coverage, is they don't actually link to the document. So it's like if someone wants to dig in and find more, it's very difficult. So I'd encourage members of our media to link to the primary source so that people can dig in and understand for themselves. Tompkins Weekly covered this issue today with a relatively comprehensive article with some interviews that I think is worth a read. And I am going to be on WHC radio to talk a little bit about this tomorrow morning as well. So we're trying to make sure that it's covered well in some of those areas.
Forgive me, I may have missed it. Was the press release published anywhere?
It is published on our website, on the city website.
But we did give it to the news outlets
We gave
to
it to
encourage them to publish it as well?
Yes, we gave it to the city's media list, which is comprehensive of all of the regional media.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Alderperson Fabrizio.
Thank you for your very thorough work on this. I really appreciate it. So this, I just want to inject a little bit of fiscal reality, since that's what you would expect me to do. So this looks like millions of dollars, this project, to do it properly. And I'm just wondering, I understand the urgency that you might feel to move this along, but it seems to me like voting on this and not knowing how, what is our target figure? How are we going to achieve that amount of money? What is our financial commitment? How is this going to impact our budget? How is it going to impact our tax rate? I mean, I just feel like there's so many unknowns. We don't know if there's any federal money that would potentially be available, federal or state money. Obviously, federal money is pretty scary to think about right now, but I do still think that serious conversations with our representatives, I know I mentioned that before, I think should be happening. I would want to know that we had some serious conversations with the county and what the commitment level was of the county before I would be ready to commit what I think is really significant multi-year funding for this. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I don't know what percentage of this would be capital funding.
I just want to quickly bracket this conversation with just some of the procedural steps, because I think you raised a good point about where are we committed and when are we committed.
Yep.
I think the deputy city manager is bringing a resolution to council to accept the report next week. What that would do is enable city staff to begin to put together piecemeal proposals around the objectives of that report for council's consideration, with the idea at this time of no more expenditures than the $801,000 that council authorized in capital funds, as well as the rollover of, and I know it was the deputy city manager's presentation, but the rollover of the operational funds from previous years. And I think I share your concern around our ability to tap into partner resources. But I think, to the deputy city manager's point earlier, us having a clearly articulated policy plan that's been adopted by council strengthens our bargaining position in as we look forward to determine to what extent we implement those capital improvements and operational increase in operational and programmatic activities, where those funding resources come from. So I think that's a very good question. I think procedurally, the first thing council needs to do is notionally understand if this is resources permitting the direction we want to move in.
Right, resources permitting.
And I'm sorry to
Phrase to
jump there,
use.
Dom. I just no.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, this, like the next vote doesn't commit us to doing this when we don't even know where the funding is coming from or how much.
It's already been committed.
Well, a piece of the funding has been committed. That's probably a very small amount of what this would cost us over multi-years. You're talking about 2 to 3 staff members, right? So, that wasn't even part of what we saw up there. So, what we saw used about half of what's been already committed. But you're talking about a pilot program for 2 to 3 years with 2 to 3 staff members. That is a significant amount of money. So I would not be prepared to vote on something that makes gives us that sort of commitment.
Understood.
Alderperson Keel, please.
Yeah, one of the things I've got a couple points. The first is that I think that those are valid concerns, Alderperson Fabrizio. I also think that any expense of especially capital funds has to be approved through a capital project that we have to approve as Common Council in the future. So, those conversations, exactly what that looks like, when we finally have exactly how much money the county will be pitching in versus if any, versus other bodies, versus how much the space will cost when we finally have a space nailed down, versus all these other moving pieces that we just have no idea where they exist right now. All of those will be nailed down if and when a proposal comes to Common Council for the expenditure of those funds. The second thing I would mention is that I am really looking forward to the continued meeting of this encampment coordination group, as well as its expansion into more of a public sphere, which we've discussed multiple times throughout our time together. As we kind of transition from a very narrowly focused, we have this goal of revising this policy that we passed, a year ago, and it has to be done by April or it has to be done by May, to something that's a little bit more long lasting and forward thinking. And I think that's always been the goal of this group. And I think it continues to be the goal of this group. And I look forward to that. I've thoroughly enjoyed serving on this committee with Alderperson Shapiro and Alderperson Matos. And I also don't think that these meetings have been without pretty significant discussion about both the logistics of a space like this and the plan to move forward, as well as the financing. This is not something that we haven't considered. It's not something that we're not looking out for. And you have my word on that. This is something that comes up almost every meeting is, okay, how much does this cost? What does this space look like versus this space? How much does this space cost? What does the cost of one of these, water systems look like? Does that make sense? What is the half-life of these? How long are we expecting them to last? These are all things we're considering very, very carefully, and with lots of thought. So I don't know if that puts your mind at ease at all, but it's certainly not willy-nilly.
Any further questions for the Deputy City Manager? She just said thank you.
Well, it didn't put my mind at ease. I'm just playing.
Oh, well, that was okay. You're just pulling a Clyde over here. Thank you very much for this update, and we look forward to reviewing the report and considering your resolution next week.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. We'll now turn to item 3.6, Alderperson Letterman. I'm going to ask you to read your resolution in full because it was erroneously excluded from the agenda.
I'll read fast, and then I'll briefly summarize what this does. Resolution amending the position of the Common Council Labor Liaison, whereas the Common Council established position of Labor Liaison on January 4th, 2023 by resolution, whereas the position of Labor Liaison was created to provide the Common Council with adequate understanding of the status of the city's labor relations management, potential financial implications, the city's collective bargaining for budgetary purposes, whereas this resolution clarifies the fact-finding roles and responsibilities of the Common Council Labor Liaison, and now therefore be it resolved that the resolution adopted by the Common Council on January 4th, 2023, entitled Approval of Labor Liaison, is hereby repealed. Resolved that the mayor shall designate designate a member of the Common Council to serve as the Common Council Labor Liaison, who shall serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and resolve the Common Council Labor Liaison shall, 1, observe negotiated collective bargaining agreements, 2, serve as a fact finder on behalf of the
Why
Common
don't you
Council.
slow on the resolveds?
Okay.
I appreciate your
I
attempt to
speed
mimic me.
debated in high school.
No, no,
stuff.
no, I appreciate it, but just because
Observe-
council hasn't probably looked at this in a week.
Observe negotiations of collective bargaining agreements. Rob won't let me win as the short version, the speed reading competition. Observe negotiations of collective bargaining agreements. 2, served as a fact finder on behalf of the Common Council for matters relating to collective bargaining and labor relations. And 3, not purport in the course of their duties to represent the city or the city manager. The short version of this is just updating the labor liaison provisions that were created back in January 2023 after a number of demands by the 6 different unions that represented at then the sort of had lapsed contracts with the city. One, I think the purpose that was recognized back in that resolution, but I don't think was sort of adequately committed or conveyed, was to help with some of the financial long-term planning of understanding what financial commitments are going to be made. So they're sort of not a surprise when they come to council after the budget of how much money we're going to be asked to allocate. And then the other was trying to figure out what's the role of the labor liaison and just creating a niche for it outside of just the collective bargaining agreements, because there are other issues that come up in terms of MOUs or side letters. So, yes.
So that's so moved. Is it seconded? Seconded by Alderperson Shapiro. Alderperson Kumar, you recognize.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my support for this. I do think that, as the labor liaison position exists, it is helpful to have somebody just like attending those negotiations and being able to report back. But I do know that, a lot of, I've been hearing from people as well and staff and that having a little bit more, I guess, teeth in this position, a little bit more responsibility would be helpful. And I also think it goes really well in line with kind of our sentiments as a council of wanting to have a little bit more input, a little bit more of an active role in where our money is going, for example.
Oh, and then the one thing the city manager asked me to mention is I'm meeting with her and Catherine Muskin, who's our assistant city attorney for labor relations. Just about some couple finer points on this later this month before we adopt this. So there may be 1 or 2 more changes, but should I put this on consent or the regular one?
Especially if you're going to bring changes.
Okay. All right. So I guess we'll move this to the regular agenda for the, what is it, May 7th?
Alderperson Keel.
Do you feel like there were specific instances that prompted this resolution and these changes for you and now in your new role?
Just a reminder that I don't know what your answer is going to be. Just a reminder that we could maybe move into executive session if it's going to be something we shouldn't discuss publicly. No, and the answer may be a public one.
Yeah, I mean, I think like broad strokes, the thing was, and I just like, as a labor relations nerd, I know this, like there are a lot of labor relations things that are issues that, I've just heard the grapevine or just aware of, where it'd be helpful to have it to be more of a formalized information channel to council. I think that was independent, that's outside of just the CBAs, which I think only some of them are usually, most of them are 3 years, some of them are 4 years. So, yeah.
Person Brown.
I just want to say I totally support this because I really believe I was here when that gang came in about, and we were, the council was like, we didn't know what was going on. So this gives us an opportunity to be updated. And I like the part about making that, giving you more teeth in that position. Thank you.
Alderperson Fabrizio.
Yeah, I was going to ask, maybe Duxon would be the best person to answer this question for me. So in years past, has council been involved in any way with setting a target for a negotiated contract? Like who, in other words, I know that we used to have the city attorney involved. Now we have an outside attorney involved. So who sets the sort of parameters for the person who's actually doing the negotiating?
The mayor and the controller did.
The mayor and the controller in the past.
Also, just to remind you, there's a labor negotiations committee. It's not entirely outsourced. So it is myself, the HR director, the controller, and our assistant city attorney on the city side, in addition to the person who we contract to coordinate the negotiations. So it's not just, we don't outsource it entirely and have no input.
Right, but so council historically has had no input in where we're going, like how much they're willing to go or spend or whatever.
Procedural answer, not taking a normative position, because, as the alderperson noted, because the chief executive officer hitherto was an elected official responsible for creating the budget. No, there was no council directive. It was the mayor's budget was presented to council. And in the same way that council sets broad policy guidance for the administration is a successor in that function in bringing proposals to the Common Council for ratification, not taking a position on that. That's describing what the system is.
So theoretically, council would set some broad guidelines, like theoretically we would do for the budget coming up.
Correct. Alderperson Letterman.
Yeah, I'll also say, again, because these are negotiations, both sides, it's this two-phased on both sides, how it's set up in state labor relations law, right? So you have your principles that recommend it. So on the union side, they have a negotiating team. The city has their negotiating team. And then the union has to give it to their membership and they vote on and approve it. And we don't really see that. And then they bring it back to us and we vote on and approve it. And if any of those 2 outer groups reject it, then you have to go back to the table and figure it out. I don't know of any. Although in New York, it's weird. You can't strike, so they just continue with the old agreement until a new one, which is what was going on in past years.
One question for Clyde. So the changes that you're envisioning would be changes that a non ILR nerd would be able to manage?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think the whole hope of actually, it's about the hope of American labor relations. I'm going to stop myself. Yeah. I think anyone should be able to understand stuff. And a lot of labor relations is also just vibes and feelings and sentiments and sort of getting the temperature of what's going on. So.
All right, let's turn this to a vote. All those in favor of moving this to the regular agenda for our next meeting? And that carries 10-0, letting the record reflect that Alderperson Shapiro is here for the vote on that. Thank you, Alderperson. With that, I will first, against my better judgment, invite a motion to extend this meeting because we have 40 minutes left. Alderperson Keel, what are you proposing?
I move to extend this meeting by 30 minutes.
Is there a second? A second by Alderperson Letterman. I'm sorry. Alderperson St. Perez, thank you. You are not going to be eligible for the executive session, so you should probably go to bed since it is way later for you.
Yeah, it's almost 3:30 here. Good night, guys.
Night, Pierre. So the motion on the table is to extend this meeting until 10:30. All those in favor? He said 30. Well, the meeting still has 40 minutes in it, so we're just extending it. That motion, those opposed? Those opposed, hands high if you oppose. And Alderperson Brown, you haven't voted one way or another. Alderperson Brown, you haven't voted. Alderperson Brown, you have not voted. Are you in the affirmative or the negative? Okay, then in that case, the motion carries. And with that, I'll very slowly move us into executive session. So let's see. Let's do. We have 3. I would like someone to move us into executive session to discuss a personnel matter.
So moved.
Keel, seconded by Alderperson Kumar. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Helen, you can end the live stream and everything. We're not going to come back. There are no voting items for the public's